Well, hello there, Borhag Thung, and welcome to all Earthlets to another episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast. I am your host, Molch-R, and we have quite the long form interview for you in this episode. We're talking to Dan Abnett, the writer on Good Grud, so much of 2000 AD. It's one of those things about Dan. It's kind of easy to forget just how long he's been working for the House of Thargan, the strips that he's brought to it over the years. I mean, just looking at the list I have here, Sinister Dexter is the obvious one. The revival of the VCs, Insurrection, Atavar, Grey Area, Brink, which is running now in 2000 AD, Feral and Foe, Kingdom, Badlands, so many others. He's done Dread Lawless, of course, running in the magazine. On top of that, he's also got a rather illustrious career with our American cousins over the pond on series such as Legion and Guardians of the Galaxy. On top of that, he is very well known to fans of the Warhammer 40k universe for doorstep books, 70 books he's written for that particular franchise. So an incredibly prolific and prodigious career. And we've had him on the podcast before. If you want to go back to our previous episodes, there's episodes on Brink, there's episodes on Lawless, where we go into a bit more depth on specific series. But I wanted to get him on the podcast. We've not really had a proper full-on career retrospective with him, so it was fantastic to be able to sit down for 2.5 hours. Maybe this is when you break up over several days, Earthlets, to talk about how he got started, how he maintains his work rate, themes of renewal, metaphor, and working with artists. There's a point we make in the interview where he has managed to work with specific artists for a long time on specific series, so making him relatively unusual in 2000 AD history. But it kind of speaks to the quality of the story. So it was wonderful to be able to sit and chat with Dan in a bit more depth about the overview of his career. Make sure that you like and subscribe us, both on YouTube, where you can watch this episode, or on your favorite podcast app. Make sure that you get every new episode every fortnight downloaded straight to your digital device of choice. I'm not going to say much more. We have got I'm looking at the wall again. We've got quite the schedule coming up over the next couple of months. Focuses on current series, deep dives with the creators. Very exciting. So thank you for staying with and listening to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. Without much further ado, let's crack on with talking to Dan Abnett, the writer of so many 2000 AD series, about his life, his career, and where he thinks it's all going. But I wanted to start by asking what I think is the most important question when talking to you.
Right.
Which of the Dan Abnett clones are you? Out of what must be a dozen? What version are we talking to here?
I think you're I don't know. Probably the donor
Abnett
from
Prime.
which all other Abnett Prime, from which all others are derived. Yes, there's one in the kitchen at the moment doing the washing up. There's another one in the garden doing calisthenics. There's one on the way to Tesco. It's very efficient. But yes, which allows me to sit here in the comfort of my own secret criminal enterprise. Volcano.
Anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about here will be utterly baffled by this. And so I'll explain. The reason I ask is because your output for quite a substantial amount of time,
37 years.
37 years is I mean the thesaurus word is prodigious.
Yes.
So I thought I'd start off with that, because no offense, and I hope
Mhm.
this doesn't upset you in any way. I've been reading your stuff since I was a kid.
Okay. No, I'm not upset, but clone number 47 is he's the one that deals with upset. He's crying now
Wonderful,
as he
perfect.
loads the dishwasher. So
Um,
it's
yeah,
the clone.
when I see a shadow at my window and like your
Yes.
face just appear because it's crawled up the side of the building. Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the clone thing though. Yes, it's I am busy. We've talked about this I know before, but I discovered fairly early on that I was a money grabbing bastard. No, I discovered fairly early on that I could work pretty fast and efficiently, but I was better when I was under pressure doing a lot. That is to say, the more time you give me to do something and the less distractions I have, the longer it takes. So that is that kind of freelance fury of I must work in order to pay bills and keep roof overhead. Developed into something where I went, actually, if I just do a lot of stuff, there's always something to do. So my prodigious output is to do with the fact that there's constantly that sort of tension, which I think makes me produce better work than if I just been left to my own devices and being very quiet. And it's hard to not do that. Actually, it's really once you start doing that, it's hard not to do that. But the clone thing, I think, particularly came about because it's not just I'm not just prolific, but I'm sort of prolific in different areas. So there's the Marvel Comics Dan, and then there's 2000 AD Dan, and there's the Warhammer Dan, and there's the whatever, So there's all these different, and I also discovered fairly early on that people genuinely thought there were two, if not three, people in the SF business generally who were called Dan Abnett who did various different things, and they didn't realize it was the same one. So you got the same name as that guy who writes for 2000 AD. I am that guy who writes for 2000 AD. Hence this idea that there will be multiple versions of me, each one carefully tailored to suit a particular thing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Wait,
it was.
I've read an interview with you where you mentioned, I think you were at a signing, and three people came over, and one read your 2000 AD stuff, and one read your Warhammer stuff,
Mhm.
and another one was your Marvel Comics stuff. And it was the definition of the phrase "never the twain shall meet,"
Yes.
in that they absorb no other part of your career. So for
Yeah.
them, you are just that one
Yeah.
kind of niche thing.
Yeah, it was a United Nations moment. I think it's different these days because that's probably 10, 15 years ago now. I mean, it was a particularly extreme version of something that happened a lot back then. And I think nowadays there's this kind of the triumph of the nerd has happened, and it's okay for everybody to like more than one thing. So
Yeah.
you can sort of spread your fandomness across a number of different things. But back then it really was. That's why this mistake occurred, and I found myself in that particular conversation sort of translating like I was a United Nations interpreter between the things I was saying about Marvel to the guy from 2008 who didn't know what that was, and then to the Warhammer guy who didn't know what the 2000, and it was a very strange experience. It is a strange. Also, that multiplicity is another asset I find to work because it means I never stay so long in one place that I get utterly sick of it. Case in point, the magnificent wonder, over the top operatic wonder of the Warhammer universe. It's a very rich place in terms of the tone. And if you stay there for too long, no matter how much you love it, and I do genuinely love it, which is why I've done so much work for them, you could just hit some kind of overkill and go, I just can't. I can't Warhammer today because I just can't. So to be able to go, instead of stopping and then taking a breather and doing nothing, it's like, well, I'm going to stop now and I'm going to do something radically different, but I'm still being productive. So that's the other reason. It's that I move from one universe to another, if you see what I mean, in order to keep it fresh and sometimes solve a problem. If I'm stuck on something, I go, latest episode of Brink isn't working. Oh, I'll just go and do this thing over here. And once I'm doing it, it's like in the back of my mind, oh yeah, that's the thing I needed for that. And because I stopped looking at it, I stopped looking at it, and therefore it solved itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's so fascinating because there's a particular type of brain, and not to be too kind of cod psychologist about it, particular type of brain that thrives in a high pressure environment and doesn't when it has lots of time.
Yeah,
and a variety of words can be attached to that. And so you do get a lot of people, particularly in the creative industry, particularly in commercial creative industries, so newspapers and things like that, who absolute, like, their brain only really releases dopamine or endorphins or even like adrenaline when you're up against it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you know, as you said, you thrive on that.
Yeah, I do. And the thing is, when I started up in the industry and was doing my first piece of freelance work, I got to know a lot of people, my generation, who was starting out as well, or very talented writers who, it's always seemed to me that the writing process for them was an incredible battle. They were great writers. They loved having written, but the actual writing process was not something they enjoyed at all. And they would tell me these stories of the kind of the sort of procrastination and you know, diversion tactics and block. And I was going, but I'm so excited when I do this. So, you know, you can't hold me back. I've got to get, you know, and that was a weird thing. So it seemed like I didn't have. I mean, I'm not pretending it's not hard work, but I don't think I've ever felt myself in that kind of tortured artist, I must write this story, oh, why won't it come out type thing, which seems to afflict an awful lot of people. And also in the comics industry particularly, I've noticed, obviously, long-standing working relationships with a number of artists, particularly on 2000 AD, it literally, for obvious reasons, takes them longer to do something than it takes the writer to do it. I mean, that's the age-old truism of comics. So for a lot of the people I work with, and Marvel and DC and everything else like that as well, what they're doing is the only thing they're doing day in, day out, week in, week out. And I see that cabin fever, where there is not only no escape from the work, but there's no escape from the setting of the work. So I have found that there have been occasions where actually my most useful thing I can do when I'm chatting to an artist is not discuss what the next episode is going to be, but just like sort of, let's talk about some other shit, something that's not that. So you get some break from the relentless week in, week out churn of doing this thing and thinking about it. So it is a weird thing. I think I've discovered over the years that sort of everybody has their own, I'm not going to say process because that's such a wanky word, but you know what I mean? Everybody has their own way of doing what
I reserve the right to use that multiple times during the course of my career.
That's fine. Okay, yeah. So everyone has their own wanky process. And and I sort of have worked mine out, although mine has changed across the years. What worked for me in the first, say, 5 or 6 years of being a freelancer does not work for me anymore. So I've refined it and I've got, right, okay, don't do that, do it this way. All sorts of things like that. But I find it very interesting. I often read interviews with creatives in a completely other, you know, music and cinema, and it's always fascinating to me how they resolve the problems that they face. Some of which are medium specific, but nevertheless, the commonality of things that people do, no matter what it is they are trying to produce. And I also, and again, I'm not saying, oh, I'm some kind of creative genius. I also know I am a commercial writer. I'm proud. I am so proud of that. I write tie-ins and license stuff, and you know, I'm a mercenary. It's just, that's what I do. It's great. I think the thing is to invest it with to take it seriously. I think I've said this to you as well before, but I'll get it out of the way now. The greatest compliment I've ever been paid, and it's been paid to me a number of different times, when somebody's read something I've written and they go, that was better than it needed to be. Because there is an expectation when you're writing something that is not your passion project or your own copyright or whatever, that you will phone it in. You know, that you will do a good respectable commercial job, and that's why you've been hired. And I'm going, no, if you're gonna do it, or just don't do it. You know, and so I will try and bring something. I try and write the story for whatever it is I'm writing that I would kind of want to read if I was a fan of, and often am a fan of that thing. And then people will say things like, well, that was you know, you put more into that than was strictly necessary. And I'm going, good, and thanks for noticing.
Well, it was one of the questions I was going to ask, which is about genre, because you know, as I've been making notes for this episode, it's really struck me that there, you know, there are commonalities of genre amongst all the stuff that you do, but that you seem most comfortable when you're able to to a degree, play with the genre. Does
Yeah.
that help with the productivity and constantly moving forward, that you are aware of the genre, and so that becomes like almost like a framework, would you say?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm not. I don't set out to, like, subvert things and reinvent the wheel. Although I have it on some occasions subverted things quite significantly, or there have been certain things. I mean, Feral and Foe is a good example of that, where that subversion was the whole point of, like what can we play around with this in a really light-hearted way, but to sort of do it in a way that sort of acknowledges the tropes rather than whatever. But I I also think that there's that I've always wanted to write something. I'm sure people could go through my body of work if they've got the willpower and find all sorts of places where they go, well, he must have been influenced by this, or he must have derived it by that. But I really do not set out ever to sort of imitate. Somebody hires me to do something, I think, well, what can I do that's new? That is entirely appropriate, but also quite a new thing to do, because I don't want to just retread a story, tell a story that people have told before. And that means sometimes you've got to bend the rules. So you come along to something that is very science fiction or very fantasy, and you think, what can I do with that will make it not what it's been up to that point, but adds some emphasis or inflection to it that is done. And again, wanky process talk, but that's and sometimes that's visible, and sometimes it's not. I've just done a decent story, and that's fine. But sometimes I go, I'm quite pleased with the fact that I did that, and it was on target, but it had I was aware of the kind of framework of what it was I was trying to do, and I sort of played with that framework in some sort of way. And that's a challenge. I get very excited when somebody contacts me and said, we want you to do this. I get very excited because I think, what can I do? What's the best thing I can do within the target area that they want, without sort of missing completely, and giving them something where they go, what the hell is this? This is not what we hired you for. And I know which one I go, but let me tell you about my wanky process.
Well, I mean, just before we started recording, you were talking about spending some time on holiday and just visiting esoteric bookshops and buying stuff specifically to how can I wheedle this into something, how can this, I mean, have you always been like a prolific reader as well?
Oh yes, absolutely. I had a Dickensian childhood, in as much as when I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was diagnosed with something called Perthes disease, which affected my left hip. And this is back in the 1700s, obviously. But back then,
you also had a surfeit of quinsy.
Yes, I did. Got over that, and the stropula, they were fine. But the Perthes disease, basically, I don't know how they treat it these days, but I had to wear a caliper. I had to wear one of those metal leg braces and a step-up shoe. So I looked like, if I stayed still too long outside a post office, I looked like the thing that the porcelain child that you put your coins in the head. Anyway, so I literally could not go outside and ride a bike and play football and that kind of stuff, because I spent 3 years hobbling around with this frame on, looking like a Dickensian beggar. So, or something like a Francis Hodgson Burnett, that kind of thing, where I was in my bedroom, pressed wistfully to the glass, looking at the children playing outside, and go, if only there was a secret garden I could visit. And so I think I would have been a prolific reader anyway. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There's all sorts of things in my life where I think, oh, is that what made me like that? And I go, no, you were like that anyway. But I do think it accentuated that. I think I read an awful lot, and it was just on the tail end of that I sort of discovered comics. I used to write and draw all the time, so I escaped that way, but also sort of fed my brain. It was really interesting, both fed my brain in terms of stories and ideas, but also in the way that people did things, and that is to say, writing or drawing and that kind of stuff. And so I just don't think you can be a prodigious creator, TM, without putting fuel in the tank on a regular basis. So I do still read, and if I wasn't doing this for a living, if I was doing something completely different, I would still be reading. But I think I used to go out and look at, like you say, go around secondhand bookshops or just look at curious and odd things with a sort of specific hunger to find that thing that I would use. And now I don't. Now I kind of just let it happen. I'll
Mm.
go and look at weird shit until something, and something will make some kind of weird resonant connection, and I'll go, oh, wait a minute. That's the thing. It's the whole thing about I own a lot of books, like a lot of us do. But when I go, oh, yeah, I need to look that thing up, and so I'll go into the the scanner on the bookshelves, looking for that particular book that's got the thing that I want to know, which is relating to the project I'm working on, and my eye will stop at something else that is completely unrelated and not what I'm looking for, and I'll go, why am I looking at that? That's not the book I want. And I'll go, I'll just have a look, and almost always I start looking into it and go, hang on a minute. That's the thing I didn't think I needed.
Yeah.
But that's a much more interesting take on that. And that's part of the synchronicity thing I look for all the time, where ideas connect asymmetrically or diagonally, and you could do all the research you want in a linear way about a particular thing, and that's great. But then there's something else that will throw it into sharp relief where you go, yes, I don't know what, I didn't know that completely different subject would enhance this, like throwing an odd flavor into a thing, but that's what makes that a different thing. I think he said in his best wanky process voice, that's what Kersler called the library angel. But
I mean, like I said, you're making it very difficult not to do like God psychology here.
I know.
Right? Come on, man. I mean, let's talk specific influences, because within your stuff, I detect a significant note of the kind of 60s kind of countercultural sci-fi people like Ray Bradbury, folk like that. Go wider. What are the things that kind of filter through the Abnett brain?
In terms of genre, I think early on I discovered Bradbury as a young reader. I love Bradbury's work, still do. I love the way he writes as much as what he writes. I mean, great ideas in there, but he was a kind of very sort of hippie poet in terms of what he was doing, sort of Walt Whitman-esque. I loved people, still do, love people like Jack Vance, both in his science fiction and his fantasy, for the kind of visual inventiveness and stuff that has really stayed with me. As a kid, so I loved SF as a kid, but I also read more broadly than that. Any good book. So there's a lot of, I don't know, kids books that I liked. Trying to think of a good example of, but stuff that sort of was tangential. Well, Alan Garner is a really good example and Garner, and so there is a very British tradition running through that, the sort of folkloric folk horror thing that lurks at the back of everything. So as a kid, I was watching things like Children of the Stones, and that those are the sorts of things that really appeal to me. I mean, I live in a part of the country where this part of the southeast, we have standing stones. We have it's one of the few bits down here that has got them. So I always felt that there was some kind of weird connectivity. That although I loved the kind of big brash American SF and fantasy of Marvel Comics and Star Wars and all those sorts of things, which obviously I've spent a lot of time working in those sorts of things, it always comes back to a sort of curiously homegrown oddness, which relates to things like that. So John Wyndham, Quatermass.
Yeah,
I suppose Doctor Who as well, but Doctor Who is a very obvious thing to go for. But those sorts of weirdness, and sometimes it's very much that. And sometimes it's just the sense of the uncanny that those things contain that you can put into things. So I think that's one of the reasons that I've always loved working for 2000 AD particularly, and probably Warhammer as well, because they are very British in their starting places in terms of their ideas of satire. If nothing else, both of them have got that deep 70s, 80s satirical root, and very much based in science fiction before you get to the fantasy, which again I think is a particularly British thing. Even so yeah, I those. But yeah, as a kid, I would also love reading, I don't know, John Buchan, sort of the Hannah adventures or whatever else, and I'm trying to think now, but drawing a blank. But it would probably be easier to come up with a list of things that I didn't really enjoy very much. Do you know what I mean? It really was. We lived in a village in the Kent countryside, and the mobile library would come around once a week, and I would get onto this and I would borrow anything with a yellow spine because that meant it was science fiction because it was probably published by Golan's. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't get what it is, and read them and then bring them back the following week.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then similarly with comics, things like Battle in 2000 AD were early things for me. I sort of discovered Marvel and American superhero comics slightly later in the British reprint form. And by then I'd already discovered that being this Dickensian cripple, the two things that I could spend my time doing and enjoying were reading books or writing stories or drawing pictures. And when comics came along, I went, oh, I could do those two things at the same time. And that was it was like, you know, sort of economy of hobby, but you know, I could write and draw these things, which led me to a real enthusiasm about storytelling, that it wasn't a story with pictures in the way that a children's book was, but there was incredible sophistication in terms of panel for panel sequential storytelling, which you know is a very interesting, very curious phenomenon. So all of those things, he says, as if he's cited a huge long list, but actually he, I dipped out after about two people there.
It's not too. I mean, what I love is talking about the kind of satirical edge and like the slightly darker stuff. You've spoken about the kind of the English countryside and the weird landscape of the Southwest. But I mean, you were born amongst the dark satanic mills of Rochdale.
No, I'm going to stop you right there.
Oh, really?
I think you did this before. No, it's not Rochdale. It's Rochester. It's Rochester in Kent. It is Dickens country.
Wow.
And no. I think the name Abnett, I've no idea where it comes from, but it's got to be French, isn't it? I think it's Huguenot. I've never been able to prove it or disprove it, but it is peculiar to the southeast in Kent.
Right.
So I grew up here between Rochester and Maidstone. So the Roch part's correct.
Yeah,
but it's Norman castles and Roman villas and weird woodland and strangenesses and that kind of stuff. But also the most invaded part of the country. Do you know what I mean? It's like everyone's been through here. The village I was born in, which is called Burham, which is a very small place right on the River Medway. If you 100 yards past the Burham sign down to the river, there is a stone that marks where Claudius landed with his Roman legions.
Right.
This is like some. It's right there. It's this crossing point. It's something that I don't know. It's not in a sort of Ian Sinclair freakish way, but I'm just very conscious of the fact that I live on this street. That's the street that when I was a kid I used to ride down on the bus going to school.
Yeah.
And never thinking that I would one day live there, and then discovering that this street, which links up to, it's the through road from Maidstone through to Rochester and the Medway towns. So it goes past all the stone circles. It goes up a place called Bluebell Hill, which is the origin point of the Phantom Hitchhiker myth of all of the 1965, which happened with the key trigger event of the Phantom Hitchhiker stories, friend of a friend story, was a month after I was born, just down the road from that. And then I discovered that actually this is one of the ancient pilgrim ways, but actually it's also Roman Road 13. And it leads down to, and I'm going, everything connects, everything. I can't escape from any of this. And I take great delight in that. Maidstone is not, forgive me, Maidstone. Maidstone is not the most attractive town. If you wanted to go to an attractive town in Kent, you go to Faversham, or you go to Canterbury, or Rochester, indeed, which you've got full of lovely historical buildings, cathedrals up the yin-yang, all this kind of stuff. Maidstone's much more sort of prosaically the county town with the law courts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But my wife and I take great delight in walking around it on a regular basis and going, either look at that weird thing there that it's sort of got forgotten about, or look at the pargeting over that shop that's been forgotten about, or seeing that ancientness and the old stories lurking there, or just going down a place which is completely bland and insignificantly modern, but knowing that originally this place was called. I mean, we had a English Civil War battle here. Significantly, I think possibly the most dramatic one that happened. It was 100 yards from where I'm sitting.
Right.
They called the Battle of Stone Street, but it came right up there. It took 24 hours in a thunderstorm. Ended with a massacre in the church down the road from me here. which stands on what is now called Havoc Square, because that's the point at which the Royalists went fuck it and cried havoc and said, just we've had enough of this. And it was street fighting, it was urban warfare, firing from windows and all this kind of stuff. I'm going, that's amazing. They all mustered up on Pennenden Heath, which is also where Jack Cade's rebellion mustered, the Peasants' Revolt mustered. The first legal case in the UK was ever two Norman bishops had a dispute, and so they had the first lawsuit ever in the UK, all up there on the Heath, where they also hung the witches and executed the prisoners and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, and it's a prehistoric meeting ground for the tribes of the South and all this. And I'm going, yeah, it don't look like much. But oh my God, there's a harmonic vibration running through the ley lines of "I'll shut up now." But you know,
I love it. Just as that Rochdale thing is in practically every single interview I could find.
Yeah. Yes, I didn't know if it was you or some because certainly I did. I've done an interview in the last year or two where somebody said, "So, what was it like growing up in Rochdale?" And I said, "I didn't," and we had to do the start over again. So that's obviously one. But oh no, one of my clones must come from Rochdale.
There we go.
Yeah,
there
Clone
we go.
47. Clone 47.
Yeah.
No wonder.
Crawled out the primordial soup of Rochdale.
Yeah. That's what it was. Yeah.
Well, let's talk. Kind of move on a little bit, because the one thing I didn't know about you was that you went to Oxford.
I did. Yeah. Yes.
To read English. I mean, that I mean, tell me a bit about that, because you kind of can't think. I mean, you can't really think of any way that's less. I mean, other than the fact that Tolkien was here, but and C.S. Lewis and blah, blah, blah.
Philip Pullman and but okay,
yeah,
point taken.
But also that it chimes for me, because when I interview a lot of artists, and I've said this before on the podcast, who have ended up going to art school, for example, as comic fans, as people who want to work in comics, those are the kind of environments that try to beat it out of them.
Yes, yeah.
Because comics are, a commercial art form, if they will accept that it is an art form at all. What effect did going to somewhere like Oxford have on this kind of,
Well, it is one of a number of things like Perthes disease that in my life that sort of happened, and as a result, things changed, and I feel like we're almost accidental but fortuitous. Right. So I grew up here. I went to school locally, and when I was a kid at school, I was a fairly good student. Went to the local grammar school, fairly good student, but I was good at the subjects I liked. So I was good at English and history and stuff like that, and not so good at things like French and maths. I always regarded as my best subject was art. My parents were both teachers. They were both art teachers. They'd gone to art college. They had a very arty, creative house.
Yeah.
And I just automatically assumed, whether it was comics or not, that's what I was going to do. I was going to go to art college and I was going to study art, and then I was going to do something with art. And I think at various times, probably in my early teens, I thought, yeah, I'll go get a job in comics, but not in that. That wasn't my destination. That was just something that I liked, because I like science fiction. I like that sort of stuff. And I had a great English teacher at school here in Maidstone who said to me one day, I think it was around about the point of what we used to call O-level, when you're making your selections for what we used to call O-level, said to me, I understand that, you're going to do arts at A-level and you want to go to art college. And I said, yes. And he goes, well, that's absolutely fine. You can do that because clearly you're good enough and you can do all that sort of stuff. But he said, have you ever thought about going to university and studying English? And I went, no, because I absolutely hadn't. I liked English as a subject. I'd read all my life, but I had never even considered that as a possibility. And he said, well, if you would like, think about it, he said, because that is as an option. You've got certain talents in that direction. You might really, really benefit from it and enjoy it. And he said, if you want to do that, come and talk to me, and I will give you some advice and guidance and all this kind of stuff. And I was so struck by it, because it was such a sort of back turn suddenly about something I've been thinking about for years and years and years. I was going to do this, and suddenly here was somebody saying, do you know what? You're sort of better at that bit than you are at that bit, which was I suppose what a teacher's supposed to do. So I took him up on his offer, and he then said, great, I would like you to take the Oxbridge entrance exam, which again, completely had not thought about doing any of that sort of thing. So I said, oh, all right, then I'll give it a go. So I did, and did it fourth term, and got a place to read English at St Edmund Hall, Oxford, which 6 months before that was not anything. That was not some long-held ambition or something my parents wanted from anything like that. It was just like this happened, and I really loved it, and immersing myself in English literature really, and really, I suppose that was sort of a what might be described as a sort of serious or academic grounding on all the stuff I've been reading up to that point. It sort of solidified the scattershot reading practices of my childhood, and actually sort of focused on the English canon and some weird things like that. And I also think around about that point, I realized that I was sort of better at writing stories than I was at drawing pictures. I was a reasonable artist, but it would take a lot of work for me to get good enough to pursue it, particularly in comics and something like that. So noticeably around that time, I stopped writing and drawing my own comics, and I started writing my own stories.
Right.
And the other reason for that, which ties back to the prodigious, prolific thing we were talking about earlier, is you could do them faster. I was sort of tired of sitting down. I'd be drawing a comic and I'd be going, I'm just going to like randomly just switch to episode 73 of this because I want to draw that bit of it. And then suddenly I was writing stories. So it was a strange thing, but like I said, completely unexpected. As was despite the amount of appreciation I had and interest I had in comics. So I ended up with this degree in English language and literature. Very respectable, Oxford, blah 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 blah, and then my mind just defaulted to like, well, I will teach English instead of art. To come from an honourable tradition of teachers, that's great. That's what I'll go and do. And somebody who knew that I liked comics said, "Oh, you should get a job in comics because you're always drawing cartoons for the college magazine and doing this kind of stuff." And I went. And it never really, at that point, occurred to me that it was an industry, certainly an industry in the UK, that one could apply for and join. I just thought these things hadn't somehow miraculously happened in America somewhere or something like that. I sound like I was very naive, but I don't think I'd ever really thought about it. So that's when I wrote a spec letter to Marvel UK, based in London, and expressed my interest in comics, and they said, "Oh, come in and have a chat with us." So I went down to see them, and I thought that was going to be a nice day out. I just thought it would be like, I get to see around the Marvel offices, that'll be fun. And I didn't fully appreciate or realize at the time they were advertising in the national press for editorial trainees, and they thought I was applying for a job. So I turned up and suddenly realized it was an interview day, and I was one of several candidates who arrived. I was like, shit, okay. So my first job there, and it was a brilliant place to work, was sort of learning from the ground up on the very sort of commercial licensed properties that Marvel UK did, as opposed to the lofty heights of 2000 AD, creating stuff. This was Care Bears and Ghostbusters and Thomas the Tank Engine and Transformers and Action Force and this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that was a brilliant piece of training, because I learned really very, very early on to go, this is the license, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and now produce a story or edit the comic for that. So for the first 2 years there, I was assistant editor on The Real Ghostbusters, which I think was one of the best-selling comics at the time. My editor was Richard Starkings, who's now of sort of lettering fame and Elephant Man and everything like that. He was brilliant. He taught me so much. It taught me an appreciation of stuff, because at the end of the day, he'd stop editing Ghostbusters and then sit there in the evening and using the Marvel office as he's lettering, I don't know, The Killing Joke or something. I'm going, that looks quite good, Richard. What's that then? He goes, oh, it's not out yet. Obviously, it's. And yeah, developed my enthusiasm there. So the way I describe it, it seems like a curious case of stumbling and then going, oh, I've managed to style that landing out. So yeah, a weird thing, and it's quite nice bringing a ridiculous academic study of English to bear on something that is not regarded as requiring that kind of I don't know whatever you want to call it, pseudishness. I don't know, but maybe that ties into why I take something seriously. I'm doing something. What's the best version of this I can do? No, I don't want to just crap it out and send it in. And so it's like, there's an amount of research, there's an amount of thinking about it, there's an amount of thinking about how I will tell the story and what sort of language I'm going to use and what's appropriate and that kind of stuff. So I don't know, but yeah, an odd thing.
Because I mean, also from a purely kind of professional level, you like you say, you weren't just writing them. You were involved in their production as well.
Mm,
You
yeah,
were sub editing. You were I think and
yeah.
like writing letters pages.
I was, yes,
Yeah.
Spengler Spirit Guide, famous, yeah, well, non-famously because I didn't get a credit, but I wrote that for like 170 issues and making shit up as I went along. Yeah, no, but and literally learning how comics worked from the inside. And this was Marvel back then was sort of pre-desktop, so it was paste up, it was hot wax machines, it was photographic mechanical transfers, it was sending the typesetting off, hand paste up. 9-sheet separation color. I worked in the color set department for ages and ages and ages. I literally learned how to build a comic, sort of, and that was brilliant. Even though the industry sort of moved on, by the time I was leaving there, had moved on. And one of the things they encouraged us to do was to have a go at everything. So have a go at lettering, to have a go at coloring, and to have a go at writing stories. Because they didn't think they could train an editor to be an editor if the editor had never written a story. I mean, how could I give, So that's when I started as a sort of overtime or whatever in the evenings, going home and writing story ideas for things and saying, Ghostbusters, Transformers, Galaxy Rangers, whatever there was a chance to do. I think my very first one was Action Force,
Right.
which is and I started writing, and for a while I was doing that. I had a day job and a night job, and I would go and writing became the thing that I really liked to do. And that, yeah, it was really fantastic training. It was fantastic training, I suppose, about delivering quickly, delivering to order, getting the right thing done, making sure you didn't break the rules and have the licensing people throw their hands up in despair, and so really, really useful, skills that I think I still, even when I'm not realizing it, deploy when I'm doing something.
Because I mean, I grew up reading the real Ghostbusters, and I still have an issue of your Galaxy Rangers kind
There
of
you go.
away in the bookcases there, and Transformers, and it because it's one of those industries. I mean, I know it's predominantly Marvel UK at the time, but it's one of those industries that doesn't necessarily exist anymore in British comics. You do get licensed comics still in America with the big brands, but so much of that is I hope I'm not upsetting anyone here. So much of that is geared towards a nostalgia market.
Yeah.
Whether you watch these shows originally or whether you've come to them since, it's still an act of nostalgia of fandom. Whereas the Marvel UK titles, especially, they were ubiquitous.
Yeah. And they were huge sellers. It was still at the tail end of the newsstand being a place where comics could thrive in that sort of regard. I think it's at its height for a long time, Ghostbusters was doing 150, 200,000 copies or a week or a fortnight, whatever it was. I can't remember. It's a blur. So it was produced because it made money. Yeah. I mean, that's what it was. And so a certain amount of that money could be spent on origination because there wasn't enough material to reprint. There was some material to reprint to begin with. So we were doing short stories, text stories, and strip pages because there was a market for it. It was not like, oh, we really want to do a Ghostbusters comic. It's no. They get that Ghostbusters comic out the door. Transformers too, these sorts of things. And so along with those, there were all the ones that, I mean, Galaxy Rangers you mentioned. I love working on Galaxy Rangers. I think it lasted 9 issues because it was a license that never caught fire in anywhere. As a toy range or anything else, and there were many others like that we get. We signed Marvel had signed the license to do this thing, and a box would arrive with a style guide and a box of toys, and it's like do a comic, and we go, all right, we got a week. Let's get to work. I remember unpacking Visionaries at one point and going, what do we,
I love the Visionaries.
Yeah.
Knights of the Magical Light.
Knights of the Magical Light. I remember, I'm not going to sing it now, but we invented whole new lyrics to the theme tunes. We'd have a video and we stick it and then go, what is this? All right, then, okay. So for every huge seller, like Transformers and Care Bears was huge, Sylvania Families, Ghostbusters, they were Thundercats actually, they were all very, very big indeed. There were all the other ones that we worked on for like a few months at a time, and it's like, no, that's not working. We're pulling that one and we're not doing it. Some of which, like I said, Galaxy Rangers particularly, I'm very, very fond of because it, it's a shame it didn't work. But it was done that because it was a commercial concern, and there was this wonderful rivalry with what was at that point Fleetway, 2008. We sort of had a we didn't really carry with us the pedigree of Marvel and all the great American Marvel stuff. Although later on we started to do origination with things like Knights of Pendragon and Death's Head, and then there was a brief but glorious explosion of UK produced American Marvel originated stuff.
Yeah.
But Fleetway was down the road. There was a regular softball matches with the 2000 AD crew, and we'd all hike out there and do that. But they had this sort of air of, yes, but we do 2000 AD, don't we? But that's proper comics, and was true. They weren't dirty little commercial idiots running around going, oh, Care Bears, yeah. But that was lovely. There was a kind of balance between the two, and obviously a lot of writers and artists in that era. We're talking about the late 80s now. The standard path, if you wanted to go into comics, was that you would once you were freelance, you would work for 2000 AD. That was the once you'd done that, you'd arrived 2000 AD, and then you would go to America, usually DC and usually Vertigo, but sometimes to Marvel, and that would be your outward path. Mine, I think I'm one of the few people from that era who went Marvel UK, Marvel US, DC, and then by the 90s back to 2000 AD. So I sort of I followed the circle the wrong way. Not for any other reason, but I just made the connections where I made the connections. But I sort of came to 2000 AD sort of as a contributor, and then a regular contributor comparatively late, having written for and was for Marvel and for DC and other American publishers, and was still doing that at the time. But to me, there was a huge satisfaction of going, this is 2000 AD. This is really exciting because it's there is an opportunity to be inventive and original in the pages of 2000 AD that actually doesn't exist in other things. We're talking about the licenses of things where you can push those limits as far as you can do. But if you're inventing a strip for 2000 AD, there's a positive encouragement for 2000 AD to be what is wild and new and crazy and strange and different, because we've done everything you can think of. What can you bring us that we haven't seen before? So that was great. That was a wonderful antidote to the I don't know, the Punisher or whatever it was I was doing that week, which of itself was delightful because I'd grown up reading American Marvel. It was like, I'm actually writing these things. That's amazing. So yeah.
Because I obviously want to talk about 2000 AD. We'll do that in a minute. It was a comment you made a moment ago about you coming in at the tail end of the newsstand as a the source of comics for the vast majority of readers.
Which had been for me as a kid, absolutely. Even buying American Marvel comics, I would go to my local newsagent and they'd have whatever they had, and if you were lucky, they'd have 3 or 4 months in succession. You could follow a title for a while, but it was like, I'm just buying it. It's there. I'm buying it, whatever it is.
But I mean, even I did some of my growing up in Blackburn, and I go around to the.
Do you mean Blackburn or do you mean Blackpool? I'm just checking.
Well, also, as an aside, the reason I was like, oh, Rochdale, I used to work in Rochdale. So
there you go. Yeah. Well, you probably met my clone.
Well, there you go then. Yes, running around. But I go around and there'd be regulars on the newsstand. But even the Marvel UK titles might disappear.
Yeah.
Or someone else will have bought the 2 copies that they would order in. So I think we got like issue 1 of the real Ghostbusters. My dad then said I couldn't read it anymore. But there'd be Galaxy Rangers, and then as a kid, it'd vanish.
Yeah.
And you would have no idea what had happened to that, other than it had just stopped.
It just stopped. Yeah,
absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. But
I think there was dare I say, a sort of excitement to that. You went to the newsagent to see what comics they had.
Yeah,
and if there was something you liked reading, you would buy the next copy, even if it wasn't the next issue sequentially. That was. I was a regular reader of 2000 AD for a very long time, and Battle and Action, but 2000 AD particularly. And I got to the point where I think I managed to persuade my newsagent to reserve me a copy, so that I wouldn't miss out. And then there was the delicious moment at Christmas where there'd be 2 issues in the same week. I just remember the joy of that, where they were published 2 in a row instead of doing the annual prog. It was like we shift out 2 issues. But other than that, it was whatever they had, and you would be happy with it. And there was never ever, none of us ever questioned that we were going into a comic shop and buying, I don't know, issue 109 of the X-Men, having never read the X-Men before. You just buy it because it looked cool.
Yeah.
And you didn't think, oh no, I won't understand it, because Because that never crossed your mind. You were joining a legacy, and you would read it until you got the hang of it, and that would be a lovely thing. And also because comics were often crafted that there was a decent amount of recap. In 1 or 2 issues in, you'd have the bare bones because the writers would build stories that way. And one of the things that happened when everything switched to sort of the direct market was this idea that people were put off by high numbers and wouldn't join in. So everything had to be relaunched over and over and over again, put out in small. And I think at that point, in many respects, a lot of great comics lost their. There have been terrific stories from that point. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of great comics lost that. One of the extraordinary things about them was the long form story. The idea that you would read Spider-Man or Batman or whatever it was month after month after month after month, and there was a cumulative thing that was in itself magnificent, even if it was made up of individual story arcs. And it is not only hard to do that these days, but it's actually the industry is geared against it. So that idea, you know, sort of. I don't know. I sometimes miss that, and weirdly now 2000 AD offers an opportunity to do that in the 2000 AD format of it's 5 pages a week, but it is a long story, and then you might come back for another long story and this kind of stuff. So it's something that I grew up on and love and think is one of the things that we lost when we lost the newsstand was the idea that you were, as it were, as a reader, brave enough just to come in and going, I'm just going to buy that. I haven't read the rest. I'll see if there's another one next month. And, you know, it was great.
But I mean, the reason I want to talk about it is because your career began just as, like you say, the tail end of the newsstand as that started to fall away. And
that's not my fault, by the way. I do want to. We should go on record at this point saying you have put 2 items.
This is where
together.
I come up with a list of names,
not necessarily related.
Well, I find it fascinating here because you came on as editorial right at the tail end of Toxic, didn't you?
Actually, no, essentially from me. Yeah, Toxic was an interesting thing. I don't know how much to say about Toxic, but Toxic, for those people who don't know, was launched as a direct competitor to 2000 AD by some of them big names who had created names. Writers and artists who created 2000 in the first place. Don't ask me to unpack why they did that. I don't think I was privy to. But no, it was towards the end of my time at Marvel as an editor, and I was already thinking about going freelance. And I was approached by, well, we'll name them, Kev O'Neill and Pat Mills, and they said we're doing this comic over here, and I'd serialized martial law in one of the things I was editing at Marvel. We did a comic called Strip, which was sort of a reprint anthology of sort of slightly grown up older stuff. So I got on well with them, particularly Kev got on well with, although I admired Pat so much as a writer because for all the reasons that you would admire Pat. And they said we want an editor for this new venture. They were going to hire it. They had got the agreement from one of the editors from the Epic imprint in America to basically come across, live in the UK and edit Toxic. And she had decided at the last minute that was not something she wanted to do. So they needed an editor, and they headhunted me. And when you are that age, you've just broken into comics, you've grown up reading 2000 AD all your life, and Pat and Kev come and say, we want you to work for us. You go, yes, there's no question at all. So that was being produced by a publishing company based in Leicester, who I think were part of the early was it Neptune Distribution? I think it was anyway. So I did that, and it was horrible. It was horrible. I think Toxic had some great things in it, and is, I think, a really interesting artifact of that era. There's some of it is very, very readable indeed. There was some very high standards stuff. There's also some nonsense in it. I think it stands there in that era, dare I say, of things like Crisis and Revolver and stuff like that, where there was some genuinely experimental things happening in an attempt to sort of hold on to a newsstand audience. But it was a weekly like 2000 AD. It was so hungry for pages that it was just exhausting trying to keep up with it. And also, it turned out that although I had been hired as the editor, I wasn't really the editor. I was the traffic manager. I really didn't get any say in content at all, which is what I'd been expecting and hoping to do. And that decision was being made by, shall we say, other people who insisted that I call myself editor so that any comments would be directed to me about the editorial decisions, where those editorial decisions weren't mine. And then, having worked for them for about 6 months, and I learned so much. Like I said, it was, generally speaking, it was a horrible experience because it was exhausting. I ended up moving to Derbyshire to be closer to because I couldn't commute. I was trying to work out of a satellite office in London. Just everything about it was nonsense. And only once I'd moved out of London and gone to live in Derbyshire and commuting up and down the M1 to Leicester so I could be in the office every day, did I discover that essentially the company itself was on its last legs, and the guy running it was, I won't say he was a crook, but he was cutting corners in order to stay afloat. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And I realised by being there that artists weren't getting paid. I was being told they were getting paid, all this sort of stuff. So I ended up quitting. I quit and escaped with as much original artwork as I possibly could to mail back to the artists so they get something back from it. And was stuck then, not stuck in Derbyshire. What a horrible thing to say. But I was there. I was like living in Derbyshire, and it's like, so couldn't move back to London financially. Couldn't move back to London, and so it made the decision to go freelance as a writer for me, and so I did. And for years, I was sort of. I had that kind of PTSD thing about it. Somebody mentioned Toxic. It was like a long, slow drag on the cigarette. I'll tell you about Toxic. But we were all in the water, and then the sharks came. But it was. But I think I learned so much. I suppose, if nothing else, I learned how horrible it could be, even with the best intentions. And I got to meet and work with some, like I said, people like Kev and Pat. Amazing. I spent time talking to them and all this stuff like that. It was amazing. But I realised how cutthroat and nasty things could get, which I think then stood me in very, very good stead for being a freelancer, because it meant that when I was dealing with companies, I was slightly less naive. Shall we say like that? But yeah, so yes, but I think it carried on. It staggered on for probably a few months after I left, because I did, But yeah, I was technically there from issue 1, although issue 1 had, I think, been put to bed. But yeah, yes, I've got the scars.
Well, for me, the timing of that is so interesting, and you going to work for. As part of the Marvel UK, the Marvel UK revival. Which this
sort of gold rush.
Yeah, was that a seamless transition into that, or was it a bit of a bumpy road and this came along and you're like?
No, it was fairly seamless, because the one like I said, I've been thinking about Marvel going freelance and writing, because writing, I realised I like writing more than I like the editing, and so I was doing lots of freelance writing. And I've begun to do some stuff for America, and then I got this invitation to work on Toxic, and I went, well, that you'd be stupid not to do it. And I do believe I would have been stupid not to do it, even though it turned out to be a sort of a bad thing. I think I would have been stupid to say no. But I was freelancing then as well, so I was beginning to doing work for Marvel US, UK, and working still for Marvel UK. I think Paul Neary was taking over then, and that was the real boom point where I think Marvel US realised that Marvel UK could basically be a sweatshop to produce comics that they could fill their newsstands with in American format. And that was this extraordinary output where we Paul would ring me up and say, we've got an art, they'd secure some great artist and they didn't want to lose him. So we need a script for him so that we can say he's employed. Can you come up with something overnight? And I would just invent stuff, or he'd say, "Here's a character sketch. What's that?" And I don't know. And he goes, "Well, it's a 22-page comic by Monday morning." And I go, "All right then," which was wonderful. And so that when the Toxic thing stopped, I was at least very, very employed as a freelance writer. That sort of tidied me over when suddenly the day job disappeared. Yeah. And that was we did some brilliant things, and that was again a brilliant era. The people working both editorially and freelance for Marvel at that point are now some of the biggest names in the industry. Some of the artists who came along and they were, my very first story ever was an Action Force story, a 6-page Action Force story, 5 pages, I don't know. Wrote it on spec for Marvel, submitted it to Richard Starkings. Richard gave it back to me covered in red ink, and I thought, he didn't like that, and he did, but he was showing me all the things that I could have done to make the layout work. It was then given to an upcoming artist who just walked in the door that nobody had ever heard of, but he was trying his luck and he wanted to get a job in comics, called Brian Hitch. And that was that sort of thing. I mean, Dougie Braithwaite, Liam Sharp. I mean, loads of just people coming in, and we were all nobody. and we were all starting out, and it was, oh, he's quite good, isn't he? Or and there was a generation there that we didn't recognize at the time, I suppose. But you now look at where everybody is, and you think that's quite an impressive showing. The number of us who are still in the industry. Let me put it that way. Considering the state of the industry,
I think it's often underplayed because people talk about the British invasion of the 80s, of Moore and Gibbons and whatnot. But the second longer phase of the British invasion that lasted from the kind of late 80s all the way through to almost 2000. Has probably had an equal, if not a greater.
I think it has, and has produced a great deal more comics. I think the difference, there's a kind of difference is, this is a massive oversimplification, but the British invasion of the 80s with Alan Moore, with all those, they were producing sort of bespoke, amazing, groundbreaking things, which in many instances, Watchmen being the obvious example, sort of change, or that alongside the Dark Knight Returns, which I know was not British creators, but the idea that they sort of changed the way American comics worked, and everybody then started to imitate those for better or for worse. I think in some cases for worse, because it took it down a route that it sort of could never, a nosedive, it could never pull itself up from. But nevertheless, there was a sense of this kind of like incredibly talented celebrity writers and artists that they were being poached for. It wasn't so much an invasion as a land grab of this talent to work for these companies. By the time we were doing it, I think that was more of a genuine invasion, because we just wanted to pursue the work. We went where the work was.
Yeah.
And without sounding like we're downplaying our talents, we weren't coming through the door with our idea for the next Watchmen or something like that. We just wanted to write, and we would work on characters. We would happily do, sort of pick up the baton and do the thing, rather than trying to produce something that was going to be groundbreaking and mold-breaking. So I think that is the difference. The idea that there was a kind of zeitgeisty penetration of the US market by British creators in the 80s, followed by I don't know what word to use to describe it, but it was more about the working ability of us. A lot of us have been trained on doing weekly comics, so we were fast and we were good in terms of being able to get it and run with it and deliver something very, very fast. So I may have told you this, but I discovered that according to an American website that talked about prolificness in terms of number of pages produced in careers, I am now the 14th most prolific writer in the American industry ever.
Right.
And up from 16 last year. And
it's been a busy year.
And I think everybody else in the top 20 are American, and many of them are either dead or no longer working. And I think, how did I manage that? And also that does not take into account the endless streams of stuff I've done for Marvel UK or for 2000 AD or the novels or any of those kinds. So clearly that ties into the prolific thing. But I think a lot of us went out there and we just did, we were work for hire. What do you want done? What do you need writing? What can we, hence the weird list of credits that I've got in terms of, sort of, well, even at Marvel or everything like that. Yes, we need an issue of that. We need a fill issue on this. I'll happily do that. There was a sense, rather than being a kind of fated celebrity being brought in to show us how wonderful they could be, there was a sense of being willing to be a soldier in the trenches, like it had been in the 60s and 70s in the Marvel bullpen, where whoever was around would do the next thing because it needed to be done. And there was a willingness to do that, which came out of the mindset of that kind of weekly British production of comics. Which made us useful, I think. And then if we could do it well enough, and I'd like to think I was doing it well enough, that you could do things where people went, actually, not only was that on time and what we needed, but actually it was better than it needed to be. And then you start producing pieces of work where people think, oh, that's, stay with you. Guardians of the Galaxy being an obvious example. Before that, actually, DC Legion of Superheroes, I've given that job of reinventing that, and the fans hated it, because it was such a radical departure from Legion. And then 10 years further on, conventions, people are going, I wish they'd do your Legion again, because it's not been the same since. So there's that passing of fashion where you at least leave your fingerprints on something for a while, and are delighted to discover that people are still detecting that there and saying that was something I'm very fond of.
Do you think that to a degree that willingness to do whatever work came along and you know,
Yeah, I'm a whore.
to...
I'm a total.
Oh no, steady on. Don't put words into my mouth.
No, but I was serious when I said I'm that gun for hire mercenary.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I have turned down work over the years when somebody's come along and said, no, I'm just simply not doing that, or I don't think I can do that. I don't think I've got the necessary dorsal muscles to be able to pull that one off or whatever. And I've done that more. I've had the luxury of being able to do that more as I've got older and have a better reputation. People come to me and I say, no, I just don't think I'd be interested enough. But I was absolutely unashamedly, if people said, can you do the bit of work, and I thought I could do it, I would do it.
Yeah.
Because I felt I could. I felt I had the skill set to do something, but also I knew that it would be a learning experience. So, yeah, why not? It's like being I don't know, it's all the negative words, but it's be like being a hack reporter or something, or a stringer on a newspaper. It's like you do it, you just do it because that's the job you're doing. Yeah. There's not something dirty and grubby about it. You're just like, yes, I'll write the Ronald McDonald Happy Meal comic.
I wasn't actually going down that route.
Yes,
I've clearly touched a button there.
Yeah.
But no, what I was going to ask was, having done that, do you think in any respects that's kind of closed off your ability to come in with something like your own Watchmen or something like that? You know, you've had celebrated runs on specific comics, but you know, the sheer breadth and variety of what you've done, particularly in American comics, do you think that's you've essentially been labeled as a journeyman?
Yeah, the journeyman was the word I was looking for earlier. Yes, I think I probably have, but then that if I don't think I've ever been pretentious enough to sit there going, I think I've got the next Watchman. I must hand deliver it to an editor who will appreciate it. I've just gone, I think I've got a great story and I've gone and sold it. And if, you know, do you know what I mean? That's that kind of thing. So maybe I wouldn't get offered a big prestige thing anymore. But then again, who is, in this day and age of a dying industry, it's like the idea of going somewhere with a 12-issue miniseries that reinvents comics, and people go, yeah, but can we make it sell? There are different criteria. Other things have moved in the meantime, and I have never been, like I said, ashamed or have had any regret about just being work for hire, doing that job. I do think, and this is not me artificially dragging it back across there, but I do think 2000 AD has given me that opportunity. It may not, I may not have done things with the sort of ballyhoo of Watchmen, but there are things that I've done for 2000 AD that I think that's, if anything's my, you know, Brink or The Out or something like that, if anything's my Watchmen, it's that. That's the thing I really wanted to do. It comes from me. Yes, it was serialized in 5-page weekly installments rather than put out as a prestige deluxe series, but nevertheless, that couldn't have been more me. That couldn't have been more what I wanted to do. I wasn't compromised by saying, oh, it's got to be set in the Marvel universe, you've got to use these characters, it's got to be whatever. You know, that is the glory of 2080. So that sort of imaginative freedom is that you know, Matt Tharg is a very steady hand on the tiller and he won't let you go crazy. But generally speaking, what he's there doing is encouraging your own personal voice, which is why I suppose, because of the multiple clone thing, I had different voices in 2000 AD that I'd like to think, and maybe I'm fooling myself, but that you read the different strips of mine, and if you didn't know who'd written them, you wouldn't necessarily know they had been written by the same person, because they're different out. The stylistic tone of Brink is different from Lawless, is different from Feral and Foe, is different from Sinister Dexter, because that's the point of doing something different. You know, you get a chance to write with a different mask on or whatever. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you say not to drag it back, but I was looking for a handy segue into.
There you go.
2000 AD. What precipitated? You know, having done that, the circle in reverse, as it what precipitated the move to writing for 2000 AD?
An invitation. I have to say it was simple as that. Now, because you've got to bear in mind, all through my career, touch wood, I've always been working for multiple people at once. So it's not like my work at Marvel US and DC ran out. I was still working for them. It's just that finally the door was opened. I think it was probably thanks to John Tomlinson, but it was the people who were working editorial, Alan McKenzie working editorial, and they'd seen my work and they realised that, you know, I clearly was a fairly safe pair of hands, and would I like to work on 2000 AD? And I went, of course I would. You know, I adore 2000 AD. I still read it. I've been there since Prog 1. I just thank you, and therefore I did it, and it was but again they're being used. I suppose as a journeyman, I think the first two things I did were one-off dread stories that Ron Smith drew. I mean, that's a great way to start. And then I was writing all sorts of bits and pieces, but a lot of Vector 13, which was the
Tharg replacement.
the future shocks of
Yeah.
its time, like one-shot stories. And so I was a journeyman. I was helping them to produce material to make sure the prog was full every week, and I could do it. And it was after doing that they started to either say, and by they I mean the Thargs, the various Thargs who were, you know, some David Bishop and Andy Diggle and then Matt we're going, well, you know, could you write this? Would you like to reinvent Durham Red? Would you like to have a crack at the VCs, or would you like to submit ideas? And that was the point where I went, yes, I would like to submit ideas. Yes, of course I'd like to write Durham Red. Yes, who wouldn't? Oh, yes, of course I'd like to do the VCs, please. But yes, that's when I submitted things. And I think the first ongoing that I got accepted was Sinister Dexter. And, you know, and that's a long time ago.
I mean, this is so right. Sinister Dexter is one of those strips that can be a little divisive.
Yes, I know. I know.
But I think an awful lot of people do forget how long it has been a staple of 2000 AD.
It has. It's I think it's now 27 years it's been running. I've written all of it, and it's been a regular. It's not like it's been in for a few years and then disappeared for 5 and come back. It's always been running. It was I pitched 5 ideas for stories to 2000 AD when they finally said, give us something give us your idea for a strip.
Yeah.
The other 4 were much more sophisticated, well worked out, and then there was this throwaway thing called Sinister Dexter on the end, and that was, of course, the one they picked. And I didn't know how much juice it would have, but I had a very clear idea about what it would be like, and I started writing it. And in those early year or so, I think it picked up attention and got popular enough. And so it was David Bishop at the time said, "This is great, and I know you can produce it fast enough. We're going to put it in every issue." And it was the first thing since Slain that had been actually had a permanent place in the and we're talking about it being a placeholder or a space filler or whatever, but it was also reliable. We always know this Sinister Dexter, particularly because I was writing very short stories, like one-offs, so we could almost run them in any order. You could give them back to different artists. It was a great thing. It was almost like a little one-man Future Shocks that could happen there. And then it kept going. So I can't remember how long it lasted as every issue, but it's a year at least, and probably was longer than that, probably more than that. And then clearly people going, oh my god, that again. So we slowed down. But that's also why 2008 Sinister Dexter has been fundamentally reinvented several times. I mean, it always returns to its Sinister Dexterness, but there have been times when it's not been called that, where the cast emphasis has changed, where we you know, all sorts of different things. Because you can't do something for that long and not become incredibly fond of it. In fact, you can't do something like that in the first place and not be quite fond of it to have suggested it in the first place.
Yeah.
And when it's built up its own legacy between good stories and bad stories and everything else in between that you've done just over the years, you go, yeah, is there something else I can do with this? What can we do? Which is why it has undergone a massive reinvention recently. And again, it's no longer called Sinister Dexter, but characters there have persisted. And I think maybe that is me responding to that thing we were talking about earlier on, which is the idea of the long form. Even in a weird haphazard soap opera-y way that Sinister Dexter is, but it is that long form thing. Is that part of the pleasure for me is coming back to it and going, what can I do now? What have I said? What can I pick up on and do? What will make a sufficient story? What haven't I done before? How can I bend the rules? How can I break the rules and start over? All those sorts of things. So yeah, that was, I never ever expected it to last as long as it did, and I think it's because it was such a simple idea that it has been open to such an amount of reinvention and variation over the years. Because you can do anything in Sinister Dexter. You name it, we can do it. There have been serious stories. It's meant to be a sort of lighthearted, sometimes out and out comedic strip, but there have been some very serious stories. One shots. There have been, you know, sort of 5 pages of conversation. There have been every genre you can possibly imagine. Yeah, it is a sort of, I don't know what you call it. It's an opportunity to tell stories because you can make anything fit to it.
Has there ever been a time when you've sat down and gone, don't know about this?
For Sinister Dexter in particular, or
Yeah.
generally?
Well, let's go for Sinister Dexter in particular, and then
Uh,
we can talk more generally.
I think there are sometimes like anything you work on for a long time where I'm going, I'm not quite sure what to do next. So there have been periods where it's rested.
Mm,
And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to come back to that. I'll put a full stop hit now, but leave the door open. Or that's when I've reinvented something. But I think generally, everybody experiences that. I think it's what's generally called writer's block, and I don't believe that writer's block is as common as people make it out to be. I think sometimes you just get tired
mm,
of doing something, but particularly if you're doing the same thing over and over again. And by the same thing, I mean the same genre or the same IP or something like that. And you just go, I need a break from that, which is why I move around between things and sort of mix things up and don't stay anywhere for too long. Even in the writing process, like sort of writing, say, a novel for Warhammer, that takes 3 4 months to do that. I'll be doing other things in the meantime. And the third day of the week when I just can't face another Space Marine, that's when I will go and write whatever the next 2000 AD strip is that's needed,
yeah.
because it's a change of pace. And then when I come back to the Space Marines, suddenly they're all wonderful, exciting, and new and fresh again.
Mm,
And then you get a better novel out of it. So I think it's more about your wanky process, but it's more about your tactics about
mm,
how you deploy your creativity. Because I think it's too easy to go, I am doing this one thing, it has exhausted me, I am now creatively bankrupt, I need to stop. And then you stop for a week and you do nothing. And when you
mm,
come back to it, you've got to build the momentum back up to get it going again. Whereas actually, if you just go, I need to put that to one side for an hour or a day or a couple of days, I'll do something else instead. It's like you're using the brain, but you're using it in a different way. You're thinking about different vocabularies and different words and different ideas, different tones and styles. And like I said, sometimes that will fix the problem you had without you even realizing. When you go back to it, you realize that writing an episode of Sinister Dexter has solved my Marvel or Warhammer plot problem that I
mm.
was up at night working out, because that's, you never solve a plot problem by hitting it with a hammer and sitting there going, you will be fixed. Just don't think about it, and your subconscious will do all the rest, and you'll go,
Mm.
oh, that was so obvious. Why was I worried about it? So it gives you an opportunity to do that without deflating your overall energy of just being productive. I
Mm.
mean, I think everybody needs a break from time, as you were saying earlier on. I've been away for a week, and weekend, you stop. You do need that time. You need to recharge the batteries, to read, to put fuel back into, to be inspired, all those kind of things. But I mean, I not only am I unashamedly a working writer, commercial writer. I keep office hours. Sort of not. I do start early, but it's 9 to 5 each day, weekdays. At the end of the day, it's like, well, I'll pick up on that tomorrow. Close the office
Mm.
door, walk away. That's routine regularity, which sounds very unglamorous and uncreative, unartistic, is vital for your mental health, I
Mm.
think.
Mm.
It's too easy to stay up all night for 6 nights in a row to get something finished and then not be able to work for another month. It's like, learn how you work, learn what your rhythms are, and how to fit those to the rhythms of the deadline and the production schedule and everything like that. And that's great. And then you actually end up having some sort of life outside of it, even if that life outside of it is most of the time subtly feeding that,
Mm.
sort of. But yeah, so yes, there are mornings where I sit there and go, I have no idea what to do, but nevertheless they are few and far between. There's usually something I can do,
Mm.
even if it's not the thing that I got up that morning thinking I needed to do. There's some way I can channel something, and in doing that, get the motors turning.
Mm. Yeah, do you practice meditation or anything like that?
I Don't get me started. Yes, I
Oh,
do.
come right.
No, I do. I for the last few years I have been doing yoga, of all things. Because I was not an athletic kid.
Mm.
See caliper story earlier. By the time I was out of calipers and then my leg was perfectly healthy and I could do those things, I was just shit at them, because I had lost 3 or 4 years of development in absolutely the prime period of childhood to
Yeah.
learn to not only strengthen stamina and all the obvious things, but more particularly things like reflexes and I'm most hopeless.
Mm.
So I hated games, I hated PE, just didn't like it. So I've been very much a sort of bookish, not physically fit person.
Mm.
And in the times of my life, at various points in my life where I've thought, you know what, you ought to do a bit of exercise, really. There've been periods where I've like gone to a gym regularly, and I just think, and I don't mind going to it. Lovely, of itself. It's the doing it every day or every couple of days. It's like, it's so boring. So anyway, long story short, about 5 years ago, I was really interested in meditation because I know that I certainly access a quasi trance-like state when I work or go into the zone. And I thought meditation might be an interesting thing to do. Plus the fact, and let's not go down this sidetrack, but I'm also epileptic. So I'm all about altered mental states, me in this house. But I found that meditation was not something I could listen to a CD or read a book and teach myself. I'm sure some people could do it. I couldn't do it. So somebody said, well, yoga is about breathing and meditation. So if you took yoga lessons or yoga classes, that might really help. So I started doing that about 5 or 6 years ago, essentially to learn about the meditation. I thought, if I have to do all the other bits, the breathing and then the standing in funny shapes, I'll do that as well. But that's not why I'm doing it. 5 years later, I could not be without it. I absolutely could not be. I'm sorry to be the completely hopeless middle-aged evangelist, but I finally found the exercise that suits me because somehow it allows me to think. I never find it boring. I can now physically do things that I could not do 5 years ago. I'm sort of fitter in it and stronger and everything than I've sort of ever been. But that's had a huge impact on my mental health. Which is related to the breathing and the meditation things that I've learned to do as part of that, and that's massive. That's a huge thing. In fact, when people making their New Year's resolution, it was particularly noticeable last year. I've been doing it. It's a slow, gradual, but last year was the year where it suddenly I was going, oh my God, look, I've got a muscle where I've never had a muscle. But they're really weird things, or realizing I could flex and balance in ways that I couldn't do before, and that I felt amazing. I felt very different. And I was thinking about last year when you get to the point where you're making New Year's resolutions and thinking back on what you did the year. And every year prior to that, when I've chatted to friends about it, they said, what was your highlight of the year? And it was like, it was the big family events, or it was or it was a bit, writing a particular book or a comic that you're very proud of or something like that, which is always true. And those things remain. But I really got to the end of last year and thought, you know what, the thing I'm proudest of is the sort of my, whatever you want to call it, but the work I've done on myself in terms of daily yoga and walking and exercise, and the way I not just transform myself in some kind of, oh, look at me getting fit, but the way I transform myself in the way I think and feel about things, which is massive. So yes to meditation, and I promise to stop evangelizing at that point.
No, wonderful. Well, I'm conscious of the amount of time we've gone on, and we've still got so much to cover, but I wanted to really dig into the 2000 AD stuff, because I mean, you mentioned the reinvention of Durham Red there. Going from taking the John and Alan and Carlos's original, and with Mark Harrison moving away from the kind of space western fully into the kind of hard sci-fi Ian M. Banks style thing. Tell us a bit about that invitation to work on Durham Red, and B, your thinking behind that decision to have a radical reinvention.
Yes, I can't remember exactly why I was asked if I would like to have a go at it. I don't know if the writer was leaving or they just wanted to change the creative lineup, but Mark had been doing a great job. And I'd known Mark from his work on White Dwarf, because I was a big role-playing game player. And I think it was that thing we were talking about earlier about mucking about with the genre. I loved Durham Red and Strontium Dog, but there had been a lot of stories of that. And because it was Durham Red and not Strontium Dog, there seemed to be an opportunity to play with the format a little bit more. Mark then, as now, we've worked together ever since with things like the Grey Area and The Out. He's got such a hunger for out and out science fiction. I think we went, let's just deliberately reinvent it for a while, even though it will inevitably go back to what it is. But let's just go and do big space opera stuff and play around with that. And I think it was one of those occasions where the idea just was there. I was just sitting there and thinking, oh, we could do this. And it was like immediately, well, of course, that's what we're going to do. And it was accepted. And it was great. It was a great thing to work on and set up the working relationship I have with Mark that has persisted through other things, where he is sort of feeding. I will say, I think we're going to do a story where this is going to happen. And it was like bombarded with visual designs for how these things would work, which is just fantastic. And that's really what led to The Out as the ultimate expression of that, where it was, what do we want to do? We want to do a story that is a sort of celebration of like the 60s and 70s science fiction art that we grew up looking at.
Mm.
And initially the brief was, I will write a story where every episode, one page is sort of a splash where you can just whatever you want to do, and then I'll make up text to fit it. It was, sort of, so giving him the freest possible reign to be the Chris Voss or Peter Elson or whatever it was of the 70s, doing just these amazing covers, which often had nothing to do with the book inside.
Yeah.
And I said, do that. Tell me what you're going to do. I will then take the storyline through that, but make it, anchor it to the images you're giving me. And that did to developments of ideas and stuff like that. But that all came from Durham Red, I think, really, where I was, at that point, there was a slightly sort of writer bias where I was saying, well, I think it should be this. And he was the artist and going, great. And then he would give me ideas for that. But more and more as we went on through Durham Red, he was going, what could we set it on I don't know, an ice planet, or could we do this with it? And I go, yeah, there's no reason. The story can exist wherever we take it, but that's what we'll do with it.
Looking back on that now, because it kind of stands. I said it's interesting that you mentioned, when the invitation came, because of course by that point, John and Alan were long gone from the strip, and with, shall we say, varying degrees of success. Others like Garth Ennis had tried, and there'd been the Tales of the Doghouse, stuff like that. But it seems to be the Durham Red lingers, not just in terms of the side of it, because there were several collections that came out of that, but also in terms of is affection the right word?
Yeah.
That it was such a prominent strip during that phase of 2000 AD where it was kind of trying to pick itself back up.
Yeah.
In hindsight, how do you feel about that strip now?
I think I'm very proud of it. I think when you're when you're inheriting a character, you look at what are the things that make that, what are the big key selling points of that character, and one of the fact that it was Strontium Dog, therefore it was Bounty Hunters and Space Western, the fact that it was a female character, which was comparatively rare, but also it was a female version of a male character. The strip was Strontium Dog, Johnny Alpha. Here's the female Strontium Dog. And that there was the vampiric, so therefore a sort of supernatural thing that wasn't really supernatural but appeared to be. And I thought, well, let's play up on the things that are about her, most of all, her vampiric nature and the fact that she's a she, rather than trying to make a big deal out of the bit that she's sort of, as it were, borrowing or inheriting from the existing strip. If you want a Strontium Dog strip, let's have Strontium Dog himself. What can we do with her, with those, spacefaring quasi-vampire, etc., etc., etc.? And so I think it was great. I think it was very inventive. I think the art was so good people paid attention to it, but I think the story was such a departure that people also got quite invested in finding out how this could possibly be happening. So yes, I am. It's a long time since I've looked back at it actually now, but I am very proud of it, and I think it was. In some respects, it's a pretty good example of the sort of things that I've done for 2000 AD and elsewhere, but 2000 AD ever since, be it my own story or something where I've taken something over or picked something up and done a new version of it, where it's like you keep as much of its inherent DNA as you possibly can, because that's why it's a thing in the first place. But what can you do that makes it different? What marks it out? What gives it that spin, that twist that maybe people, I haven't seen this before. That's why it's suddenly really compelling and interesting. And yeah, I think we managed to do that. I think it was quite successful in that regard. Yeah, I wonder. I was just wondering whether Mark himself also looks back on it, because he's like the biggest critic of his own work, and he even his process has changed over the years, but I still think it stands up pretty damn well. And I think we even got an action figure out of it. Do you know?
Yeah, one of the reaction.
Yeah. Weird.
which lingered in our warehouse for a very, very long time.
I'm sure. Yeah,
they're still popping up every now and again. It's interesting you talk about that, because in 2002 you revived the VCs.
Yeah.
which was the Jerry Finley Day, Mick McMahon, Gary Leach, Cam
Ted
Kennedy
Kennedy, yes.
series,
Yeah, yeah.
which was my first experience of 2000 AD.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
As I mentioned on the podcast before, I picked up the best of 2000 AD. I think it was issue 30 or issue 33 or something like that. And you, because obviously I didn't work at 2000 AD at that point. I remember reading it, and as a reader who was used to the old stuff, I had a hard time accommodating the new strip. So I wanted to ask you about that again, about the process, the decisions you made in how you took that forward, because around about the same that time you were very much on a kind of military sci-fi space kick, because there was Atavar as well that you did with Richard Elson. So yeah, just take us through the process of that and how you came to
well, a number of things. First of all, I think I petitioned to do the VCs, which there was a great resistance to bring it back. The VCs have been one of my probably my favorite strip of all the early strips. I just loved it. I mean, the art was stupendous, but I just loved everything about it. And I think that one of the resistance, I could be wrong, but I believe it wasn't originally going to be a Star-Lord, or it was a strip for another comic that got folded into 2000 AD. I don't know whether it was originally intended for 2000 AD. I could be wrong, but anyway, there was some resistance. The other thing was that it always felt like a finite story, which in the original run ended completely. They won the war. War's over. But I thought it'd be great to do something with it. A lot like Blake Seven, most of the characters were dead. I don't want to reimagine it and do a new updated version of it. I don't want to do I don't want to go back in time and tell stories set within the context of the original series, because that feels like a cheat, and we know how it's going to end. I wanted to genuinely do a sequel, long form again, a sequel that built on the continuity established and picked up and said, right, sort of however many years later, this is where the survivors are now, and this is what they're doing now, and go into it that way. So it was, and I think there is a resistance. There is a resistance to I think when creators come back to strips that they didn't originally create. Not that I encountered that very much with Durham Red, but there was with that, it was like, well, you didn't write this first time. I think if I reinvent Sinister Dexter, no one cares. No one really Sinister. No one cares because it was mine in the first place. But when you're taking sort of sacred ground and that kind of stuff. But I think maybe Durham Red we got away with because there was a continuity of the artist. It was still the artist who'd been working on it, now telling a new story, which was taking it in a radical direction. But yes, I just wanted to do those sort of grounded lo-fi science fiction things with the VCs that they'd done so well in the first place. That sort of fairly believable space combat, military science fiction stuff, which yes, I was doing a lot of then and still am, because that is obviously the legacy of things like Warhammer and stuff like that. That it is military SF. So yes, I tried to give it the same kind of feel. Obviously, it had to be populated with new characters. We explain the way the history had moved and what was going on now. Invent some new vernacular, etc., etc., etc. It was it was a pleasure to do, and I'm glad they gave me the chance.
Now this is going to sound wanky, but I always think of it in the kind of context of 9/11. And the fact 2002, so invasion of Afghanistan and the Iraq War. 2 years later, we get the Battlestar Galactica reboot on TV, which, to be quite frank, and not that I'm saying there's any direct connection between these two things, but it is essentially the same thing, taking a beloved 1970s, 1980s thing, and retooling it in a different way, but continuing. Like you say, not going back and revisiting the original, but continuing the story, so it's decades later, and the old anniversary comes back, and a remarkable piece of synchronicity.
Yeah. I think so. And I think there are probably other examples of that. There is always that zeitgeisty influence. You're either you're either going, I must do a military SF story because there's a war on, so it's tied in. So it's either a deliberate choice, or it's just it's a weirdly subconscious choice. I mean, I really think that, and I think sometimes also we're now seeing the generations of fandom. Why did I want to write the VCs? Because I'd read it as a kid.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
why did they bring back Battlestar? Presumably because they'd seen it as kids. Do you know what I mean? There is we see that renewal where yes, you can invent the new stuff. I often invent new stuff, but sometimes it's like I really love that thing. Why aren't we doing some more of that? There's absolutely no reason. If Judge Dredd and Strong Team Dog and Rogue Trooper can last for however many years, and we can still go back and tell new stories about them. Why can't we do that for something, even if it has rested for a while? So I think there's that. I mean, I think um, there's a whole podcast we could have about Grey Area. And you think about when Grey Area was coming out and
Mm.
what the
Mm.
themes of Grey Area are. I was not at the start of that, not consciously writing that with any kind of political satirical agenda at all. It was just the idea about what about the immigration issues and the rise of the far right and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Holy shit, does that look prophetic now? Does that look like I was desperately mining the Guardian every day to try and find things to put in a comic strip? But I wasn't. But clearly, I was in that world, and that was happening around me. You watch the news, you'd hear these things, and I don't think I was deliberately going, "Oh, I know, I use that." It was just
Yeah.
like that was going into it. It couldn't not go. It would have been weird if it hadn't gone into it.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I think it's a grey area. Actually, it sort of stands remarkably. There were things that I know that there was that thing. It's both The Simpsons and 2000 AD are often credited with predicting the future. But I do remember working on Grey Area because we did it for quite a long time and may return to it at some point. But we were doing it, and there were certain things where I went, "Oh my God, 6 months ago we wrote a story about that,"
Mm.
because it kept sort of happening in large or small ways. That's a really interesting experience. So sometimes I think it's just thematically in a time of crisis like 9/11 and the wars that followed it. I think there was a natural bias towards stories about military, even in science fiction terms,
Mm.
because that felt it was a way of kind of possibly even exercising your desire to
Well,
avenge or
like
protect.
processing what's happening.
Yeah, you're processing.
Yeah.
You're fighting a war. You're literally fighting a war with the way you feel about things,
Mm.
and there was a strong need for vengeance and for justice and all this kind of stuff. So you tell war stories. Of
Mm.
course they do. I think that's one of the reasons Battlestar Galactica worked so well in that era. But I think even when it's less obvious, you see these things. I mean, I can do it again. I am not suggesting for a moment I'm the only person who's ever written for 2000 AD who's done a storyline about AI. Obviously, I'm not. Obviously, I'm not. But
To the point of
Azimuth,
cliche.
to the point of cliche.
Cliche.
But the 25th anniversary story in Sinister Dexter, which was Bulletopia,
Mm.
was all about the escape of a rogue AI and everything like that, which then led directly to Azimuth.
Mm.
And it, again, not to, well, yeah, I suppose almost to the same extent, writing Azimuth, and just keeping up with all the constant news about AI and all the stuff that's going on with it, and the fact that it's becoming increasingly ridiculous. Again, let's not get sidetracked into that specific subject, but I'm going, yes, that's it. Yet again, clearly, I was aware of that zeitgeisty thing looming and found it interesting enough to start writing about it. And by the time I'd been writing about it for a little while, it would become a bigger zeitgeisty thing. So I'm not saying I predicted it, but what I'm saying is that strip very much came out of the things that 3, 4, 5 years ago were beginning to become things that were getting mentioned and I'd read articles about. And I think that's sort of inevitable. I mean, you could say really in its own way, Feral and Foe was created to give Richard Elson an opportunity to do something different because he'd done the things he'd been doing for a while and he fancied doing something and he said, I'd love to do some fantasy. I immediately went to D&D and role-playing games because that's where has always been a great love and interest of mine. But that was also around about the time where those things were becoming cool again.
Mm.
So there was it's like, well, okay, that's clearly so you're channeling things, and I don't think that's a bad thing because not only are you channeling as a creator, writer, or artist, you're channeling things that are in the water at the time because that's where the public mood and interest is, So it's inspiring you, and you're going, that's an interesting thing to play with. But you're also clearly channeling things that readers are going to be interested in. If you're doing, whether they know it or not, they're responding to things in those stories. And you could see that going right the way back through 2008's history. We go back to particularly Dread, all the different stories in Dread where you go, well, that was definitely inspired by, at the time, that sort of stuff was going on, fast food or whatever it is. These are storylines that are inspired by the headlines of the day. Because of that satiric. When people say satirical, they think about that kind of particularly sharp and direct attack on something to do. But I think satire is a much broader thing. Satire is almost like a state of mind where you are talking about the world in a way that is indirect and perhaps taking the piss or exaggerating or something like that. It can be a very gentle satire in as much as it's simply in tune with those things, and you're getting a different take on something rather than being a sort of poisonous attack, or not poisonous, but you know what I mean. I'm sure you get it. Yeah, my craft has failed me now.
Well, I wanted to ask about your mental process when you are writing. And we've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but because I remember when the 2000 AD Ultimate Collection started, and one of the early volumes was Kingdom.
Yes,
which is one we haven't touched on.
Yeah,
Which is my favourites. And I wrote a piece about the language that you use, and drew the obvious comparison to A Clockwork Orange and Anthony Burgess, but also the kind of social constructs within language as a medium of control. And I remember I sent you the draft before I sent it on to Matt, and you came back and your reply was, "Thank you for your learned interpretation of my work."
Which was not a piss, taking the piss as I meant it to say. Yeah, no, seriously. That is. I was doing a lot of those things deliberately, but I think I was also doing a lot of those things subconsciously without realizing how much I was doing it. And for you to sit there and as it would say, look what you did, and I go, oh God, I did, and that's not an accident. It's not like you're reading something into it and saying, oh, it's like, oh my God, I did do that. But so much of that was sort of intuitive. Once I had the basic starting point, that was intuitive. That is, I suppose, a good example of what that kind of is better than it needed to be. Kingdom could have been a much more simple, straightforward story, because it was trying to create something for Richard to draw that he would enjoy. The more you start doing it, the more you inevitably want to put things into it. And I right from the word go, I thought having a very particular type of voice in it, which Burgess is one, Russell Hoban's another, the sort of almost that kind of sort of outback Australian slang things, all of those things going on. I just wanted it to be there. So it had a weird, the words worked in a weird way to go with the things we were seeing. And once you commit to that, you're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. You know what I mean? So you better do it all the way. So that's that sort of thing about, that it could have been, Kingdom could have been I'm sure, perfectly successful strip without that layer in it. I put that layer in it because I thought it would benefit from having an extra thing, and it was probably more enjoyable for me to write it in that regard. It made it very interesting when it came to actually structuring the story, because the whole thing is about a narrative voice telling you a story, and therefore that's how those stories worked, and they become sort of like little fables and myths, or like sort of fireside tales told of some post-apocalyptic thing that happened before. And I really, really like that about it, which is why it's got a voice that is completely different to, say, Brink. I mean, it couldn't be further from it.
It's that element of and maybe this comes back to what you studied when you were a student, that kind of analytical use of maybe analytical is not the right word, but wordplay and how words go together, because it would be remiss of me
I know what you're going to say.
Not to do an interview, long form interview with you, and not talk about punnage and the damage you have wrought.
Yes.
Because if surely if there's one thing that has fully sustained Sinister Dexter,
it's the quality of the puns. Yeah. No, it is. Unashamedly. Yes, I think when you use the word wordplay,
Mm.
you really hit on something, because I think that really is, without, again, sorry, with wanky process again, but that is, I like to play with words.
Mm.
So sometimes it is literally playing with words, like it's in Dexter. What's the most ridiculous thing you can come up with? And I still write them down. What did I come on? My notebook is full of things that I think of. Oh yeah, that's a Sinister Dexter pun. That's a stupid note. Where it's punning. It's just making stupid references or conflating things and putting them together and mucking about for the sake of amusing people, I think. But that sense of wordplay, in the sense of playfulness or playing with things, is what then says to me, okay, in Kingdom, it will have a patois, it will have a particular use of language, and it will have repetitions, and it will have words they use and words they don't use, and a very, very set vocabulary. That's the same way that in Ring, for instance, it's got to be incredibly matter of fact, professional, stripped down. So I will absolutely reduce the number of bolds and in the so it has that kind of line of duty professionals talking sense of stuff, where it goes off into sort of technical details without needing to explain itself. So again, very different. So it's a matter of like, so what does this comic strip sound like? And how can I use the dialogue that I've got available to me, or the narrative, or both, to establish that world as quickly as I can, doing my part to help the heavy lifting that the artist is doing by showing us that. Which is why I think they sound very different. It's the same way that Lawless, I know that's magazine, but Lawless is unashamedly space western. It's unashamedly a western, to the point where we're deliberately trying to find those tropes and use that, and everybody talks in that particular way, which is a delight to write. So they are playing with things. It's not only is it fun for me to try and find a different voice for each strip, but like I said, I think it would be remiss of me to try and write them in the same voice, because it would be weird if it would just be weird. It would be, if you could imagine, I don't know, The Out written like Brink, or I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And there is, and you can make comparisons. Obviously, it's all me, and I'm not some kind of genius who can change personalities like that. Feral and Foe, I think, has got quite a lot of connective tissue to Sinister Dexter, in as much as it is playful with the language, but instead of making pop culture puns and jokes, it's making jokes about the fantasy literature and role-playing games in particular. But it's employing the same kind of slightly broad sweep thing, so that you can see those similarities there. But it's I don't know. That's why I do it. That's why I do it, because I figure I've got to earn my paycheck. It's like just like next. Meanwhile, some dialogue.
Well, you mentioned Lawless there. Now, I think I previously had you on to talk about Lawless, so we won't go too deep into it. But that, along with Insurrection, which was the point when Warhammer and 2000 AD in their great divergence then came back and clashed again. And you've done relatively little actual Dread.
Relatively little actual.
It's all been Dread World. I mean, is there a reason for that? Is it because you prefer to play in the sandbox rather than play with the action?
No fuckers asked me to write Dread. Is what that's what it is. Matt asked me to do. I think he had Colin McNeil, who I know and worked with before, lined up to do something Dread Universe, and I think he said I don't know whether he was thinking Warhammer when he asked me, but he said, "Can you do a big sort of space opera thing?" And I immediately did what I always do, which we've been discussing this time around. It's like, okay, what can I bring to that? What's going to be different? It's got to be absolutely the Dread universe, but how do I interpret it? The whole idea of the colonial marshals and colonies, and what if the judges are literally the bad guys in this story, rather than just like sort of satirically the bad guys? This is and that was great. And I don't think I really thought to myself, I'm putting Warhammer and the Dread universe together. To me, it was space opera. That was the big new thing that I was bringing to the party. The fact that there obviously are connections to the visual style of Warhammer and stuff like that is second. And I also love the evolution of things like that. So Insurrection was great fun to work on. I think it was a properly big statement-y story that was making big points about morals and ethics and codes of honor and all sorts
Yeah.
of things like that. Possibly politically, who knows? Not my place to say. But the fact that Colin wanted to go on and do different other bits and pieces, and there was an idea that we had this idea of continuing it. The fact that it would evolve into something that, unless you were told, was sort of a continuation, you wouldn't necessarily know that. I mean, there are lots of references made back and forth, but if you've never read Insurrection, you won't get those references. But then, to bring the great Phil Winslade in, who criminally had never really worked for 2000 AD, and then to produce a strip for him that he enjoys so much, he just stays on and does and delights in, and it becomes less a story like Insurrection about huge space action and political statements and ethics, and much more a story about character. It's Lawless is character, absolutely character. It is the characters. It is those old West cliched character tropes and how they, and a lot of them inverted or played around with and that sort of stuff. And I think the biggest and most satisfying storylines in Lawless have been the ones that have played out on a character basis rather than just a big adventure where they kill the bad guy or whatever. I think that's it. So I love the fact that those two things, you could sit down, you could start at the beginning of Insurrection and read all the way through Lawless, and it'd be one big story. But it pivots halfway through and becomes something very, very different, and hopefully equally entertaining, but because it's appealing to different things and it's delivering you different things.
That idea of the pivot, because you've already mentioned about the pivots within Sinister Dexter, where you've effectively, reboot is the wrong word, but just pivoted, changed direction, rethought it. And with something like Azimuth, what's the process that you go through? It's a wanky process. What's the process that you go through when reevaluating something that you've spent a lot of time already writing?
Well, there's a number of different things. I think, gosh, it's a case by case basis for a start. But I think it is more a case of there is often, when you've been working on something for a very long time, you do start to ask yourself, particularly if you feel that the tank is a bit empty, you go, is this reaching the end of its natural life? Have I written all the Sinister Dexter stories I can possibly think of? In which case, do I acknowledge that? Or do I desperately try and cling on to my livelihood and try and find a way of reinventing? So that's the joke answer, is that you reinvent it in order to be able to write some more stories by changing the rules, and therefore maintain your gainful employment on that. But I also think that it's very, once you've been doing something for like 27 years or the 79, 80 episodes of The Lawless, you start going, well, I feel really weird if this ended. So there must be other stories that we can fit into this. It's a matter of being inventive and trying to find a way of doing it. And sometimes what you've got to do is go, okay, what is this? What is this that I'm writing? And what does it need? What new thing does it need in order to be able to tell brand new, fresh stories and freshen it up? But also, what old things do I need to cut out of it? So you need to do a full reboot, like we did when we did Malone and when we did Download Tales and then Azimuth. How do you completely reinvent this story in order to do something? Or it's a case of I've got a great idea for a story, but it doesn't quite fit this, but it would be perfect for this if I'm allowed to change my own rules, which of course I am. So I think that there is that. I think I think Sinister Dexter, I had seriously contemplated making that 25th anniversary story the end. But I also feel like when you don't want to close that door, but you also do want to deliver an ending. So if I wrote the definitive ending of Sinister Dexter and then 3 years later I went, I want to write some more, you've got to kind of unpick it. But you don't also want to leave it and go, if we stop there, I don't know. We can't tell. Nobody can tell if I stop there. So I think it was when with Tazio Bettid, who came in on Sinister Dexter. He's a terrific artist. I mean, we've had great artists on Sinister Dexter, but he came to it with such gusto and a sort of almost a willingness to draw complicated things. It's like I couldn't throw anything at him that you can go, yeah, I'll do that. So it almost became a kind of daring each other. It's like, if I did a story where this happened, would you draw it? Yeah, okay. And that was great. And then I suddenly realized, wait a minute, with him on board, I could, I could, I had the confidence to completely reboot it, including the world itself, and give it a whole new visual flair and bring in new characters and new ideas. And in a whole new language, as you probably noticed, Azimuth has got its own terminology and language and all this sort of stuff. So that the language of Sinister Dexter is an outsider, is an intruder. When he says "fump," people don't know what he's talking. You know what I mean? It's got that. It's like one strip has invaded another. But also, it gave me a chance to do for Tazio what I had done, say, for Mark Harrison with Durham Red and with the Out and etc., which is like saying you are enjoying doing this, but what can we change about it to make it even more you? How can we allow you to make your imprint on this? So a lot of the things that I built into Azimuth as a writer was from talking to Tassie about what would you love to draw. That's how we'll change this world, so that you can get to draw the things that you will love drawing and therefore draw so beautifully. So there was that. It is quite that's how you make the sausages. There's a lot of sort of very practical conversations. If I make this world like this, are you going to be prepared to draw it for several episodes, or are you going to hate it? Or what can I put into it that will make you so excited that we can? So that's how it works. That's why I have ongoing regular conversations with Tazia, with Mark Harrison on the Out, with Ian on Brink, with Phil on Lawless, with Richard, with the discussions. What the next Feral and Foe story that we're doing? Richard said, "I'd love to do a story where this happens." I went, "Say no more." So although I've written a story, it's come from a seed that he gave me. This is what I'd like to do, and I went, "Oh, that would be really cool. Okay, let's see what we can do with that." So it's a team sport, isn't it? It absolutely is a team sport. If you are simply writing stories and expecting your artist to draw them every month without any impact or feedback or anything like that, then you're not making full use of the opportunity of creative collaboration. And I find that a lot of stuff I've done over the years, not just 2008, has gone off in really interesting, brilliant, unexpected directions because the artist said, "Do you know what? I'd love to do this." Or, "Have you thought of that?" And I'm going, "No, I haven't, but now I have. Great, let's go and do that thing with it." That's it is. I think it is. Again, you're sort of failing the reader if you're not making full advantage of what a comic is in terms of the way it's put together and how the people working on it work together. Particularly when you're dealing with people as talented as Mark Harrison and Phil Winslade and Ian Colbard. For goodness sake, you need to give them their opportunity to make their mark as well, more above and beyond the mark they're already making by just drawing it beautifully. Sort of. And that has, like I said, that leads to wonderful results. And I think I've said this to you before, but it's also that thing. It's like when you say working at Marvel and they say, "Oh, we'd like you to take over this book. Can you give us the outline for the next 6 months or to a year of what you want to do?" And you go, "Yes, I can this afternoon. These are the ideas I have for that today. Here it is." But you won't be sticking to that because 3 or 4 months in, you'll get other good ideas that you'll need to incorporate. The whole idea is growing. You don't get all your good ideas on one day. So you pitch something and then you go, "Oh, now I've been working in this for a few weeks or days or whatever. I've suddenly thought of this. That would make this even better. Okay, we're going to fit it in. I don't care. We're going to have to make sure that fits in there because the story will be better for it." That's the long form again. That's the sequential storytelling over a serialized period. It's a serialized period of creativity as well as publishing, and I think that's a really wonderful thing to exploit.
You've hit on something that's I hate using this phrase, but I can't think of anything fairly unique. Something can't be fairly it's either unique or it isn't. But anyway, which is the your with your work, you are thinking about long form storytelling in a comic book where you have 5 or 6 pages a week. But you have managed to maintain. Since Dexter notwithstanding, you've managed to maintain a continuity of art on several like major new series over the past 20 odd years. Do you think that's because you do that process of collaborating. So the artist is enjoying it as much as you are to a degree.
Yes. Well, they all tell me they enjoy it, and that's why they keep coming back for more. And I mean, and either that's, I mean, with Ian, I've worked on. I mean, we're now on book 6 of Brink, but we've also done work for many other publishers together because we love working together. With Mark Harrison, he's come back for more several times because there's been several different phases of work where we let's invent something new because that one's coming to an end.
Yeah. Richard
Elson's the same as that with Phil. It's just we finally got a chance to work together and we're delighted, and we've been doing it for I'd like to think it's that, and I think it's that. I'd like to think it's that rather than the Polaroids of them I've got in the drawer. I do think it keeps it fresh, and even when you are, because the pacing, you said the pacing. Everybody these days in the comics industry seems to think about the trade paperback that's going to be at the end, because that is kind of the persistent form. That's the end form, which if you're going to collect it, ultimately that you're going to have on your shelf. You'll have all the omnibus editions of whatever it is. And I think a lot of people, particularly in the American market, write for the trade paperback. They write for the collected edition. And we were talking about buying comics at random off the newsstand in the 70s and the 80s when they were just like whatever you could get your hands on. And you never felt lost because the writers there made an effort to make sure that there was at least some sense of, previously on Daredevil or whatever. And sort of, and things were explained in a particular comic language that was always so very delightful, even if it was a little box out with an asterisk saying, as seen last issue. And I think I have tried wherever possible, without interfering with the tone of the story, to do that, so that a lot of these, so that even if it's 5-page installments on a weekly basis, I do not trust that everybody's read the previous one. So there's usually a recap. I think the only one that doesn't really get a recap is Brink, because it has a very television style feel to it, and that would be incongruous and would disrupt it. But quite often there will be plenty of recapping going on. To make sure that nobody picks up and goes, what's going on? This is part 5 of something. I've no idea what it is. And I then don't think that matters when you do get your collected edition, that material exists in it, because I think people are comfortable with it, because I try and make those recaps organically part of the story, that something, the information is communicated to you without it feeling like this, I'm obliged to tell you this because it's the beginning of another episode. So that is... So I suppose what I'm talking about is thinking about both it in terms of 5 pages every week, but also a book at the end, and trying to write it in a way that both of those things are satisfying without compromising each other. And then with Lawless, of course, it's 10 pages a month and a book at the end. And you wouldn't think that would be a big difference, but that is a colossal difference in terms of your pace. Yeah. Getting 10 pages a month rather than 5 pages a week is a completely different beast. So that Lawless to me feels much more like a I don't know. I was going to say TV drama, but that's not making a sufficient distinction. But there's a very much a sense of, this week on Lawless, this episode of Lawless is about this, and that there is a beginning, middle, and ending, even if it's a part of a multi-part story, so that you could read it and you're not going to go, it's another 3 weeks, 4 weeks before I get to see the next bit of it. That it is self-contained, even if it leaves you on a cliffhanger. Whereas unashamedly in 2000 AD, part of the point is like cliffhanger, because it's come back next week to find out whether these characters are dead. Psst, they're not. I
mean, that's with Brink, you've kind of taken the notion of the slow burn almost to breaking point. To Pinterest
levels of pausing. Yeah.
Will he come? Yes, he will come. Has he come? No.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a with, because I didn't think that they would. I didn't think 2000 AD would commission Brink. I'll be perfectly honest. Okay. Ian and I have worked successfully together with things like Wild's End for Boom and stuff for Dark Horse and everything like that. We love working together. Obviously, New Dead Audience for Vertigo, which I had invited him to come and work with me on it. And we wanted to do something else, and we were both working separately for 2000 AD, and we said we should do 2000 AD because it'd be fun to do it in 5 pages. Literally that. Wouldn't it be fun to work together on something to build a story that was told in 5-page installments rather than the monthly comic books we've been doing elsewhere? Yeah. Great, we'll do that. And we had this idea, bring this sort of true detective police procedural, blah 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 blah. And I pitched it to Matt, but I really didn't think he'd say yes, because I think he'd say no. It's a bit. First of all, we were asking for a lot of real estate, You know, we want long series, and and it's a lot of talking, and it's sort of unglamorously. So it's not showy, weird SF that is, you know, will make a great big statement on the page in classic 2000 AD. It's not the ABC Warriors, let's face it. It's not like big, amazing things.
Yeah.
It's like very low key, very small scale. It's just human faces talking to each other with a very deliberate, mannered style of dialogue that, as I said, it's like, I don't know, Bosch or Line of Duty or something like that, where it's pared down and unemphatic and workaday and all this kind of stuff. So I was amazed when he said yes. And so we just went for it. And I was then amazed when the audience went, this is great. And I think they liked it because it was a different voice again. It wasn't, you could enjoy Dread, you could enjoy whatever else was in the product that month, and then there would be that week. And then there would also be Brink doing its Brinky thing that was very, very different to everything else that's going on. And I think, if anything, we've managed to, and Ian's art is a great deal to do with this, we've managed to tap into the uncanny and the tension. I think there's huge tension in Brink because it's not, nothing is happening, but you know something is gonna, and you know when it's gonna happen, it's gonna be probably very unpleasant and come out of left field. And the working language, the way they talk to each other, the sort of very, very realistic dialogue where they don't use each other's names very often, and they talk about technical terms about police procedural stuff like that, is kind of hypnotizing you into a set state of, this is a real place, isn't it? This is a real place where real people live and real things going on. Oh my God, what's just happened? Which I think is another way of SF, particularly in comic form, sort of slipping the fantastic to you in a way that you're not expecting it to come from. You know, sort of delivering it in a way that feels believable and delivers a shock and that kind of stuff. And I think I'd like to think we are not taking the piss with Brink in terms of how slow burn it is, but we do deliberately take our time and that kind of forensic detail about looking at that stuff. And we now have, I know all sorts of things about where we're going. Do you know what I mean? And I also know how far away some of those things are going to be. And we don't care because people have joined us for this ride. And I think provided we just don't tell a crappy story, that we could do these things. I mean, some of the radical things that we thought of that we could do, I can't wait to do it. And Ian's got Ian is invested. He's absolutely invested in that, and he brings to. He was talking to me about the other. I think he posted on Facebook or somewhere. He was talking about all the logos he's putting into the businesses in the habitats and what he thinks they make and what he thinks they produce. And I think you're doing the same thing with the visual language that I'm doing with the actual written language in it. So so I suppose, quite apart from its own stylistic specifics, the very pace of Rink is its unique voice, as opposed to the patois of Kingdom or the American slang of Lawless or the puns of Sinister Dexter. Which
I mean, I'm kind of conscious that we've done exactly what we talked about at the beginning, where we've kind of settled on one part of your your career, when there's a whole other episodes we could do with the 40K stuff. But one thing I did want to touch on was that notion of metaphor and politics and prescience and things like that, because you know, you work extensively in the Warhammer 40K universe, which
it's something like 70 novels now I've written for them. Just like,
and to be quite frank, and I know I've used this phrase relatively recently on the podcast, some of those you could kill a man with.
You could. They are large books.
I mean, the word you used at the beginning of this thing was operatic. Now, these,
absolutely.
These are like Wagnerian operas. Some of them.
They are huge. They needed to be handled very carefully, or you'll strain something. But they've also almost all, they're regularly bestsellers. I mean, again, like 2080, there is a hungry audience who loves this stuff, and 40K is less obviously satirical than 2000 AD, let's face it, but they both come from the same sort of 70s, 80s anti-Thatcherite satire, drippingly so. And 40K may have lost a little bit of that. Nevertheless, it's still there. And I am doing exactly the same thing I love writing prose, by the way. One of the reasons I still write for them is I'm writing novels, and that's a wonderful change of pace. It's just a different process. I enjoy it very, very much. You get to handle ideas in a completely different way. Again, it's scratching another itch. It's allowing me to wear another hat or mask or whatever analogy I used earlier on. So I put lots into those novels that don't necessarily need to be there. I don't mean they're not appropriate. I'm just saying I will go the extra yard and to get the stuff in there, to get ideas in there. Some of those ideas, I suppose, are political. I think that's the other thing. You were talking about the Watchmen thing the other day, earlier on, about the idea of doing a self-acknowledgingly important comic about big themes.
Yeah.
Whereas I am a journeyman who just shits these things out for a living.
I did not use
no,
that
you
phrase.
did not say that.
So far, you've called yourself a whore.
No, I know, I know.
Shit things out. Those are your words.
Yeah, I obviously picked the wrong time for this interview, didn't I? But what I'm saying is, I think that because people aren't therefore necessarily expecting to find things in my novels or my comic book stories. They're not expected to find some deep political message, for instance, or some critique of modern life or whatever it is. The fact that from time to time those things do lurk in there in a gentle way to be taken or left behind, depending on the way you I think is really interesting, because they're just there in the story. The story's not saying, hello, I'm a big satire, read me and be satirized. It's saying, here's an adventure story. It happens to have believable characters that you care about. It happens to examine ethics. It happens to talk about overcrowding or the ecology or trade unions or whatever it is it's talking about. Because as far as I'm concerned, that's actually part of the construction of that world as a believable world, be it the 40k universe or Brink or whatever it is. So if those things exist in that world, then we better talk about them with the same degree of intent that we talk about them as they exist in the real world, if you see what I mean. And then there's stories in that. And those stories might make a point that is quite interesting if you then relate it to that. It's the VCs and Battlestar Galactica at a time of global crisis and war, isn't it? It's the same thing. That's responding to a zeitgeist. It's grey area during the rise of Trump and time of Brexit. It's exactly the same thing, where it is talking about the world. Science fiction is talking about the worlds we live in. No matter how fantastical or operatic they might seem to be. So yes, I think, and it's not me being sneaky and slipping these things in by stealth. I just think that is something I want to do when I'm writing these stories. It might be shooty death kill in space, but it could also have some commentary on something. It could make some remark. It can make some observations about things, and I think that's a really interesting to do. So I think certainly Brink has got a very strong political thing in there, but it's Brink to me, which is possibly the most political thing I write. It's not a vehicle for my political agenda. It is a story about a place that is politicized, so the politics gets examined. So it's got lots of politics in it. Do you see what I mean? It's very different. It's not like, oh, I will invent a story that will allow me to set forth my political agenda for the 21st century. No, I created a world in which there are issues that are being dealt with on an ongoing basis. Therefore, they get discussed. And in discussing those, because those issues are comparable to our world, you might think about them a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? It's not. I'm not trying to preach. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to get these ideas into circulation, possibly in ways that people aren't expecting to come across them. So they settle in their minds and they go, actually, that's an interesting thing. When I see it on the news, it's dull because this is the world a horrible place. I don't want to think about it. See it in a comic strip, I'm like, that's quite interesting, isn't it? And then at some point you go, oh, it's the same thing. So whatever I've thought about when I was reading the comic strip, I'm thinking about the world. I'm giving myself far too much credit, but that's what I'm saying.
The reason I bring it up is I so often see, I mean, particularly on the health site that is Twitter, the same argument going on and on about Warhammer and well, its origins are in 2000 AD in Thatcherite Britain and flying over the heads of, well, not necessarily flying over the heads, but some people being willfully
Yeah,
willfully refusing to actually
yeah,
understand that. And I guess that's the difficulty with any kind of, as you say, subtle satire,
yeah.
is that
Yes,
some
yes.
people just don't necessarily want
No,
to
no,
hear
no, no.
the necessary.
You absolutely cannot make people respond to that. So
Mm.
particularly when you're doing and it's also quite difficult to do subtle satire in a universe like 40K, which is not a subtle place. I mean, it's like nothing is subtle, everything is shouted. But nevertheless, I just do what I do in that. I do like
Mm.
I write novels the way I write them. They're setting there. I try and reflect the humanity at the very least, the people caught up in it, even if they're aware of how ghastly it is as a situation. Um, yeah, it's yeah. I don't. I would never co-opt. Try and co-opt 40K no more than I would want to co-opt the Marvel Universe or anything in 2000 AD to be the vehicle for my worldview.
Mm.
That's that I'm trying. You know, it's not. It's got to become like this in order for me to be able to tell people this is the way things should be. But I think when you're dealing in an established universe like the Marvel Universe or 40K Universe, which let's face it, I have helped to create with 20 years worth of novels, which have done an enormous amount to expand that IP. My worldview cannot help but be present there,
Yeah.
at least subliminally. So it exists in there, and it therefore has a bearing on the way things work. So overall, you might not see satire in it as an IP, although it is definitely baked into it from its very origins.
Mm.
But in an individual novel I've written, you might see it because I'm allowing it to swim closer to the surface, and that's fine because they let me do that. I don't think they've ever said you can't do that. Well, they said I couldn't do that once, and I can't tell you what that was. But anyway, but yes, but generally speaking, they say yes, do it as long as there's nothing when you're reading one of my 40K novels, as long as there's nothing in it as you're going along that makes you go, oh, that's not 40K, is it? That's just him getting up on a stool and saying something, or or being didactic about something, or as long as it is absolutely tonally, atmospherically appropriate to the IP, which is the thing I've been doing ever since I wrote my first Action Force story, you can do what you can do, and so I will do any opportunity I can see to do that sort of stuff is great. And I'd like to think that people I'd like to think that it challenges readers, that is to say, it challenges them to have to think about it for themselves, rather than me telling them this is how that should be thought about, which is usually what satire is doing. It's usually saying this is so ridiculous. Look how ridiculous it is now. That's what you should think. And I think that's not the way it should be. It should compel some kind of conversation, either amongst readers or with internally with a reader, where they think that's a really interesting way of looking at that. So yes, and that is the little extra bit, and it is what's the word? Vocabulary's now failed me. But it's the bit that people can take or leave, I suppose.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, if I'm writing a 40K story, if I'm writing a story for 2000 AD, if I'm writing a story for Marvel, I'm going to try and tell you an entertaining adventure featuring those characters that is appropriate to that universe, which is why you bought the thing in the first place. End of. Commercial writer. If I can put stuff in it that gives it a greater context or greater resonance or greater whatever, then please feel free to accept those as the extra things that are in there. And if they go over your head or you're not interested in those bits, skip those bits. Do you know what I mean? They're not. That's because that's the way it works. I think there's become a very strong division between entertainment, television, film, books, comics, whatever it is, and entertainment that's designed to be improving and deliver a message. And I think people can spot it a mile off. And that means that entertainment is quite often very, very lowest common denominator and often insulting to its audience. And messagey didactic stuff is very much more sort of like, oh, I don't want to watch that because it's just going to tell me what a shitty person I'm being ecologically or whatever. You know what I mean? And I think, why not? Why can't it be both? Why can't it be both of those things? Why can't we mix it up a bit? Why can't a book just be a book and a comic be a comic and a story be a story? And you get out of that what you get out of that. Who knows what I read. When I was a kid, I read Ray Bradbury for pleasure, but they are huge political ideas in things like Fahrenheit 451. For goodness sake, I didn't think, oh, he's preaching to me. I went, what a great story that was, because that's how it seemed to work to me then.
I'm conscious that we've been talking for quite a substantial period of time.
Yes, we have. I'm conscious that you've got to edit this into some kind of listenable form later on.
I'll just let it run. I'll just let it run.
Yeah.
If anyone gets to the end,
Yeah, fuck it. Well done.
But I kind of want to bring it back around to get your overview on the past 40 years of writing, and particularly to really touch on what we touched on at the very beginning, about the sheer amount that you're able to put out, the energy that you bring to it, the mixing things around, doing different things at different times, operating within not necessarily different markets, but different properties. And to find out how you feel about it now, but also, whether you've ever paid any attention or any mind to, is there an endpoint to this? Not death,
no, well,
but
yes,
a
death. I think that's what you're referring to, is my death. Yeah, no, I don't. I think at various times during the course of what is laughably called my career, I have had sort of career goals and ambitions. And I thought, if I had another 5 years doing this, and I could start, blah blah. But it never works like that, and it ends up being futile and pointless. So it's almost more a case of what opportunities are around that I can grab. I've been writing comics for the best part of 10 years, but wanted to write novels.
Yeah.
When Warhammer came along and said, we'll commission you to write a novel, so I started writing novels, and now I've written 70 of the buggers. Before that, I didn't have the time to stop and write a novel on spec to try and sell to somebody. So that was an opportunity there. And the fact that they are technically tie-in novels, I don't care. It's not like they're getting sort of short shrift. They're getting all the cheap words. So I'm saving the good words up for when I write a proper novel. It doesn't work like that at all. So the idea of you having some cohesive, in another 3 years I will be working for television. It's like, no, I've realised that the greatest opportunities I've had have come along by chance. That I really like doing the things I like doing. To all intents and purposes, I'm still doing the thing that I did 37 years ago when I started, which is writing IP, work for hire, and loving it. Why would you stop doing that? Why would you say, "Oh no, I'm too good for this now. I need to go on and do something else"? It's like, bollocks! Don't get over yourself. Just enjoy doing that thing. I also almost every day remind myself how much I actually enjoy this now. Lucky I feel that I'm doing it, that I can get up and get a kick out of it still. I don't know why. I think I'm probably ill in that regard, but nevertheless, I can get up and go, well, hey, what's next today? I'm still doing it. I also think is that if I wasn't doing this, if I had not got these breaks, and I've not had these opportunities to have this career, it would be something I would be trying to do anyway. I will be doing it in my spare time like I did when I was a kid. I'll be writing stories anyway. So the idea that somebody's crazy enough to pay me for it is just brilliant, because it's just an enthusiastic thing. And I also therefore can't imagine stopping unless somebody stops me. But you know what I mean? I can't imagine stopping, because what would I do? So if I said, over the next 3 years, I'll wind down all the stuff I've worked professionally and I will stop and I will retire, and do what? Because that need to create will still be there really until my faculties leave me. So yeah, people are stuck with me, I think. What a dreadful thing to say, but there you go.
What a point to end on. Fantastic.
What a point to end on that bombshell.
Wonderful. I mean, thank you for being so generous with your time. It's we've scratched the surface, really. I mean, talking about the amount that you've done, we've only really kind of scratched the surface on this. And at some point, I definitely want to come back and do that episode about grey area and politics.
We should do that. Yes, because that actually becomes the further time passes away from that, the more and more it looks like I was doing it absolutely deliberately and knowingly. And it's and that's fascinating. So from my point of view, going back, I'm like, oh my god, I said that. So.
No, it's great. It's. I mean, we didn't even touch on the out. Which
no,
is
that's a fairly big deal.
with Mark. I mean, we've spoken separately about them. So anybody listening to this, there are episodes on Brink
Yeah.
and yeah. But yeah, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. So we'll pick this up again in another 37 years' time when.
When we're just brains in a jar. That's
No, we're just the 99th generation clones still having the same interview going on.
Well, thank you very much, Abnett Prime.
Oh well, thank you very, very much, Mike Prime. That's very kind of you to have me on today.
Wonderful stuff. Well, thank you, Earthlets, for those of you who made it to this point at the end of a 2.5-hour episode. Thank you for sticking with it. I hope you really enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Dan for such a voluminous, in-depth retrospective on his career. Looking forward to what's happening with Brink and Feral and Foe and the Out in the future. As I said, please do like and subscribe the 2000 AD Thrillcast and help spread the word when new episodes come out every fortnight. I have been your host, Molch-R, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time for more from the galaxy's greatest podcast. Until then, take care of yourselves, Earthlets, and Splendid Verthrick.